Welcome to Mastering the Art of Negotiation Strategies for Success, brought to you by Mindful Literary. In this audiobook, we will explore the essential skills and techniques needed to become an effective negotiator. Whether you're navigating business deals, resolving conflicts, or advocating for yourself in various situations, understanding the art of negotiation is crucial. This comprehensive guide will take you through the fundamentals, help you build confidence, and provide practical strategies to achieve successful outcomes. Let's embark on this journey to unlock your negotiation potential and master the skills that will empower you in every aspect of life. Chapter 1: The Negotiator's Mindset. Understanding the Basics of Negotiation. As I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt the kind of nervous excitement that only came during my high school days. I was about to embark on my very first negotiation. The stakes, a little high in my world at the time, were my curfew hours. My parents had recently enforced what felt to me like a tyrannical bedtime of 10 p.m., while my teenage heart yearned for the freedom of a midnight arrival. I mustered the courage to approach my parents, knowing that this would not just be a simple chat, but a negotiation that would set the stage for how I approached conflicts and dilemmas in the future. I remember framing the conversation in my mind as I knocked gently on the door. My dad was sitting in the living room, glasses perched on his nose, reading the newspaper. My mom was in the kitchen, the scent of freshly baked cookies wafting through the air. The ambiance was calm, almost inviting, yet my heart raced with anticipation. I took a deep breath and began by expressing my thoughts. "Mom, Dad, I appreciate how you care about my safety and well-being," I started, a strategy I would later know as establishing rapport. It felt important to them to know that their concerns were recognized. As the dialogue unfolded, I learned that negotiation isn't just about what you want. It's about navigating through someone else's priorities and concerns. Throughout that evening, as I argued my case, I unknowingly touched on a core concept I would come to understand better over time: BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. My parents had their own alternatives, which was to stick rigidly to their rules or to perhaps monitor me through a later curfew with specific conditions attached. The key was to make my case compelling enough so that changing their stance was more attractive than what they had currently settled on. I proposed a compromise, suggesting a trial period where I would come home by 11 p.m. for 1 month. If I met all expectations, then we could reevaluate the curfew. The tension in the room was palpable as we went back and forth, my parents' skepticism battling with my blossoming confidence. I quickly learned that I needed to listen as much as I spoke. When my dad expressed concerns about safety, I countered with texts, GPS tracking, and the ever-reliable, "I'll call you, I promise." It was through those exchanges that I realized negotiation wasn't merely about bending someone to your will. It was about finding a common ground where both parties felt heard and respected. As the sun dipped below the horizon, my parents exchanged glances, and I could see that my strategy was working, even if just a little. There's a fine line between pushing and yielding, and I was walking it carefully. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they agreed to the trial. "But we'll check in with you every night," my mom added, her tone offering both a concession and a reminder of their involvement. As we shook on it, I felt victorious and wise beyond my years. Little did I know that this early experience would serve as the foundation for more significant negotiations in my life. Now, reflecting back, I realize that episode taught me invaluable lessons about negotiation that extend far beyond asking for an extra hour of freedom. It was about recognizing the value of each party's needs and finding a way to meet both parties halfway. I left that living room not just with a later curfew, but with the understanding that negotiation is a life skill, one that is both art and science, requiring empathy, strategy, and practice. The world of adults would throw bigger hurdles my way, but I had a leg up that began in my childhood, a foundation rooted in respect and collaboration. As I moved forward in life, negotiating better salaries, stronger relationships, and more meaningful connections, I often thought back to that evening. Negotiation, I realized, is about so much more than just the act itself. It's about the process, the conversations, and the relationships that grow from them. And as I delved deeper into more complex negotiations, I found myself returning, time and time again, to the wisdom of that first venture, reminding myself that the best agreements arise from mutual understanding and respect, not just compromise. It's this revelation that will serve as a compass in my journey through the intricate dance that is negotiation. The importance of emotional intelligence. Let me tell you about my friend Jessica. We met during our freshman year at university, a time filled with nervous excitement and uncertainty. Little did I know that a group project in our psychology class would be the catalyst for discovering a crucial life skill, emotional intelligence. As we sat around a table cluttered with books and laptops, I watched Jessica navigate the fraught waters of conflicting opinions and high tensions. Her ability to read the room was nothing short of remarkable. During one particularly heated debate about the direction of our project, things began to spiral out of control. Voices were raised, and ideas were dismissed with an irritation that felt palpable. I could see the frustration simmering among my classmates, and I could feel my own anxiety rising. But Jessica, calm and collected, stepped in. She didn't just drone on about collaboration or ideas. She paused, took a breath, and acknowledged how everyone was feeling. "I can sense that this topic is really important to all of us," she said, her voice steady. "But we need to remember we're on the same team." Instantly, the tension diffused. I was amazed by how her simple act of naming the emotions swirling among us shifted the conversation. Jessica exemplified what it meant to be emotionally intelligent. She knew it wasn't just about understanding her feelings, it was equally about grasping the emotions of those around her. That experience opened my eyes to a powerful truth. Emotional intelligence can significantly influence not just interpersonal dynamics, but also the outcome of any negotiation or collaboration. As the weeks rolled on, I observed Jessica tirelessly fostering connections within our group, prioritizing open communication, and establishing trust. She taught me that it's essential to acknowledge emotions, both our own and those of others, especially in high-stakes discussions where the stakes feel high. We didn't always see eye to eye, but her attentiveness to our individual perspectives ensured that no one felt sidelined or dismissed. It became clear that discussions weren't just about the project at hand, but were also about building camaraderie and understanding. As I reflect on those early days of our friendship, I realize how her efforts transformed our group from a collection of disparate individuals into a cohesive unit ready to tackle any challenges head-on. However, not every moment was smooth sailing. There was a pivotal day when our professor informed us we'd be presenting a week earlier than planned. The anxiety was palpable. I watched as one of our teammates, Sarah, who had been struggling with her section of the project, began to spiral into despair. Faced with this pressing timeline, we were at risk of fracturing under pressure. But Jessica truly shone in that moment. Instead of dismissing Sarah's fears or urging her to just get it done, Jessica reached out. "I know this change feels overwhelming," she said softly. "Let's break it down together." Watching her in that moment solidified my understanding of emotional intelligence as not merely a strategic advantage, but as an essential tool for building human connections. The way Jessica spoke to Sarah didn't just alleviate her concerns, it opened up a safe space for vulnerable dialogue. The team rallied together, and in the days that followed, we not only made progress, but also formed a stronger bond. I began to realize the potential of emotional intelligence in fostering resilience and collaboration during stressful times. The day of the presentation arrived, and I found myself filled with nerves. As we stood in front of the class, I could see the tension reflected in my teammates' faces. But Jessica's steady presence soothed my racing heart. Just before we started, she leaned in close and whispered, "Stay grounded. Remember, we have each other's backs." In that moment, I understood that emotional intelligence is as much about self-awareness as it is about empathy toward others. I took a deep breath, and suddenly, I felt ready. As we delivered our presentation with the passion and confidence we had cultivated together, I knew we were not just presenting a project. We were showcasing the power of emotional connections. In hindsight, what Jessica taught me about emotional intelligence, its importance, and its profound impact on our group dynamics shaped my understanding of human interactions in ways I could never have anticipated. It is a skill I carry into every facet of my life, one that helps navigate challenging conversations and builds bridges in both personal and professional realms. But as I moved beyond university, I soon realized that not everyone shared my enthusiasm for emotional awareness, and those moments of disconnection would soon test all I had learned. Building confidence before the conversation. Nervousness is a familiar companion in the hours leading up to an important meeting. I remember pacing in my living room, the palms of my hands slick with sweat, replaying every possible scenario in my mind. The thought of sitting across a table from influential figures made my stomach churn, and my breath felt shallow. But I also came to realize that anxiety, when harnessed correctly, could be transformed into a driving force for confidence. The first lesson I learned was the power of visualization. I began to take time each day to sit in a quiet place, close my eyes, and envision the upcoming conversation. I imagined every detail, the confident tone of my voice, the engagement in my audience's eyes, even the subtle nods of agreement. This mental rehearsal became a game changer. It allowed me to anticipate questions, forge responses in my mind, and gradually remove the fear of the unexpected. Preparation played a critical role too. I started logging my thoughts and arguments in a notebook, outlining not only what I wanted to say, but why it mattered. By collecting facts, crafting narratives, and rehearsing key points, I felt more like an architect, designing the structure of my conversation rather than a novice wandering into a labyrinth. That's when David, my mentor, stepped in. Practice mock negotiations with me. He suggested one afternoon over coffee, his eyes sparkling with belief in my potential. It felt daunting at first, but I was desperate for progress. Our practice sessions smoothed out my speech delivery and helped me find my footing. David's feedback was invaluable, turning my jumbled thoughts into clear, passionate expressions. As I grew more engaged in these exercises, I began to understand the significance of positive self-talk. Instead of letting my inner critic dominate my thoughts, I crafted affirmations that nudged me toward success. I am prepared. I am capable. I deserve to be heard. Each phrase acted like a mental shield against self-doubt. These small adjustments created a ripple effect, morphing my anxiety into an aura of self-assuredness. I attributed my blossoming confidence to a fusion of tactics, and I wanted to share these insights with others who marveled at the effortless poise of seasoned negotiators. But just as everything began to fall into place, I found myself facing my biggest challenge yet, a crucial negotiation with a potential investor who held the key to my dreams. My usual tactics began to fray at the edges as doubt crept in. Did I truly have what it takes? Would I stumble over my words in front of this important person? My heart raced as the day approached. I had prepared and practiced countless times, yet the moment of truth felt suffocatingly close. I could almost feel the weight of the looming conversation pressing down on me, igniting a familiar sense of dread. Just as I thought I could not take it anymore, I remembered David's voice echoing in my mind, urging me to channel my feelings instead of being overwhelmed by them. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and envisioned walking into that meeting room, poised and ready to advocate for myself, as I had practiced time and time again. Chapter 2: Setting the Stage. Preparation Research, the backbone of negotiation. As I sat in the dimly lit coffee shop, nervously clutching my cup of steaming espresso, I couldn't help but think back to the whirlwind of emotions and thoughts that flooded my mind during my first job offer negotiation. I had finally reached a point where my hard work and perseverance in university had led me to an interview, and now, a coveted offer on the table. But the excitement was eclipsed by a nagging doubt. Had I truly prepared myself for this moment? In the days leading up to that critical discussion, I embarked on a relentless quest for knowledge. I discovered an array of resources, industry reports, articles, and salary benchmarks spread across various websites. I scoured LinkedIn to gain insights about the company's culture and values, reading employee testimonials and company updates, allowing my intuition to weave a narrative about what it might be like to work there. Gathering such information felt like collecting puzzle pieces. Each detail, however small, contributed to a larger picture that I desperately needed to understand. Armed with the industry standards and market trends, I felt a new sense of confidence blossoming within me. No longer was I merely a fresh graduate hoping for a fair offer. I had transformed into a well-informed contender equipped with data to strengthen my position. During the negotiation meeting, as the HR manager shared their proposed salary, I recalled the figures I had meticulously researched. With a steady voice, I presented my findings, carefully outlining the rationale behind what I believed was a more equitable offer based on industry standards. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the tension of two opposing viewpoints at a crossroads. As the conversation unfolded, I realized that my research wasn't just a tool for leveraging numbers. It was the key to unlocking a deeper understanding of the negotiation landscape. I could discern when to press further and when to listen. Each new piece of information I shared shifted the tone of the discussion, embodying the power of data in persuading my counterparts. I could see the HR manager's expression change, a flicker of contemplation crossing their face as I cited statistics and threw in anecdotal evidence about similar companies. But as the negotiation heated up, I started to sense a waver in my confidence. The final numbers bounced back and forth, and for a moment, I feared my research might not be enough. I felt anticipation gripping my chest. I had prepared so meticulously, yet the stakes felt maddeningly high. My heart raced as I brought forth a final, decisive piece of information, a report highlighting the talent shortage in our industry and the value of retaining capable, driven individuals. I could see the HR manager was intrigued, their brows furrowing in thought. Suddenly, the dance of negotiation was not merely about salary, it was about recognizing value, my value, and how it aligned with the company's future. In that moment, I learned that negotiation is far more than just numbers on a piece of paper. It's about crafting a story that intertwines your insights with the goals and needs of the other party. Research was my backbone, and as the meeting lingered on, it became clear that this exchange would not only shape my starting salary, but would also set the tone for my professional ethos. With palpable tension hanging in the air, I knew the conclusion could tip either way. The next words out of the HR manager's mouth would either validate my efforts or leave me pondering what might have been. Identifying interests versus positions. The conference room was strangely quiet as I sat there across from Sarah, our project hanging like an unsteady pendulum between us. It was one of those days where it felt like every word spoken was coded in tension, as if we were both on the brink of an argument rather than a collaboration. The stakes were high. Our project was presenting critical findings, and our differences were glaring. I had my position, firmly rooted in my desire to stick with a traditional approach. Sarah, on the other hand, was advocating for a more innovative methodology that I instinctively resisted. It was more than just a clash of ideas. It felt like a clash of our very selves. I remembered a workshop I had attended on negotiation tactics, where the instructor stressed the importance of understanding interests over positions. Positions are what you say you want. Interests are why you want it, he had said, and I found myself reflecting on that in this very moment. I decided it was time to dig deeper, not just with Sarah, but within myself. I wanted to uncover the why behind my resistance, an exploration that might reveal common ground rather than a battle. Sarah, what's driving your approach? I'd love to understand more about what you're aiming for, I ventured, my voice more curious than confrontational. Sarah seemed taken aback by my question, her brows furrowing as if she was deciphering a riddle. But then, a flicker of openness crossed her face. You know, I believe we could reach a broader audience if we made our findings more accessible. I just think the conventional methods can feel limiting. Her words hung in the air, and suddenly, it clicked for me. Her position, the push for innovation, was fueled by a desire for impact. It wasn't about defying tradition. It was about reaching people. I felt my own defenses start to crumble. That's a compelling reason, Sarah. I get that. My position comes from a need for reliability and established credibility, but I can see how we might blend both perspectives to not only safeguard our project's integrity, but also expand its reach, I replied. As our conversation deepened, I found layers of shared interests emerging beneath our conflicting positions. We both wanted success. We both wanted to connect our work with the audience in a meaningful way. What had begun as a standoff morphed into an exciting potential for collaboration, a realization that what was once a burden was now an exhilarating challenge. With each exchange, the atmosphere shifted from adversarial to collaborative, like a warm breeze dispelling the early morning fog. We brainstormed ways to blend our approaches, envisioning presentations that drew on her innovative style while fortifying it with established research methods. However, just as I began to feel the momentum building, our conversation took an unexpected turn. Sarah suddenly hesitated, an uncertain look creeping into her eyes. But what if I push too hard? What if we lose the essence of what made our project so compelling in the first place? Her vulnerability struck a chord with me. It was easy to forget that negotiations aren't just about ideas on a whiteboard. They hinge on human emotions, passions, and fears. I felt a tension rise again, but this time it was different. It was the kind of tension that comes with understanding the stakes each of us faced. I think we both have our fears. I worry about the criticism that could come if we stray too far from the traditional methods, I admitted. But what if we use that fear as a lens to navigate our path? We can validate each concern and find a way forward that honors both our interests. I could see Sarah processing my words, her eyes flitting from the whiteboard to the notebook where our ideas had taken root. Time slipped by as we conducted our dance of negotiation, exploring a range of possibilities until we felt right. By the end of our discussion, I found myself exhilarated, the potential of what we could create together gleaming on the horizon. But just as we began to sketch out our newfound direction, a sudden wave of doubt surged through me. What if our superiors failed to see it the way we did? What if they only saw our positions and not the intricate web of interests that had just brought us closer? I hesitated, the tension surfacing again as I grasped the uncertainty looming ahead. We were pivoting toward collaboration, yet the effectiveness of our negotiation was now compounded by the risk of external judgment. How would we present this new vision to our audience, and would they appreciate the delicate balance we had crafted? The journey of understanding each other had begun, but the next chapter, the one that would bring our ideas into the world, was filled with its own set of challenges. I couldn't shake the feeling that our true negotiation was only just beginning. Creating a win-win scenario. Reflecting on that transformative community project with my neighbor Tom still gives me a warm sense of accomplishment. I remember how, with the first bloom of spring, we both felt the urge to bring life and color into our neighborhood. Tom envisioned bright flower beds bursting with color, while my heart was set on tidy, low-maintenance greenery that required less water and upkeep. Our visions couldn't have been more different, and yet they shared a common goal: making our neighborhood more beautiful. Though we started off feeling a little competitive, I quickly realized that we needed to shift our focus away from our individual ideas and instead explore the underlying goals we both held dear. As we attempted to articulate what we truly desired, the tension shifted from opposition to a sense of collaboration, which was both eye-opening and liberating. In those early conversations, we set a framework to generate options that appealed to both our ideas. Instead of clinging to our original concepts, we opened the floor up to brainstorming. We grabbed cups of coffee and sat on my patio, surrounded by the fragmented American dream aesthetic of our neighborhood, each fence slightly different, each house reflecting its owner. That casual setting allowed creativity to flow, free from external judgment. We listed our mutual goals: make our surroundings inviting, create a shared space, and draw people outdoors. By inviting input from neighbors as well, we set the stage for a lively discussion, engaging their thoughts and suggestions. It felt like unearthing treasure in a backyard of discarded ideas. We discovered the beauty of co-creation was a far more enriching experience than acting alone ever could have been. As we weighed various proposals, we stumbled upon the concept of a community garden, which surprisingly merged our visions beautifully. Flowers could adorn the borders, adding beauty, while the central plot consisted of easy-to-grow herbs and vegetables, offering utility. This win-win scenario blossomed as we reimagined our roles. Tom would handle the flower beds and design the colorful layout, while I would coordinate the sustainable components of the garden, teaching neighbors how to promote healthy ecosystems in their own yards. Yet, as we approached the point of finalizing our plans and gathering support, an unexpected tension arose. A strong voice in our neighborhood, who was traditionally critical of community initiatives, began to rally dissent. They argued that our efforts could lead to unkempt gardens and lost property values. It was time to step back, listen, and engage again. That moment turned our collaboration into an even more resolute drive towards consensus. Chapter 3: Getting to Know Your Counterpart. Building Rapport with Body Language. It was a crisp Wednesday morning, the kind that felt electric with possibility. Today was the day I was sitting across from one of the biggest potential clients my agency had ever encountered, an opportunity that could change the trajectory of my career. But as I glanced nervously at my reflection in the conference room's glass wall, my mind flickered back to previous encounters where my body language had sabotaged my confidence. I remembered the day during a different negotiation when I had crossed my arms tightly against my chest, a defensive posture that sent the unmistakable signal of disinterest and insecurity. The deal had slipped through my fingers, and as I sat there, I could almost hear Rachel's voice echoing in my head. Your body speaks before you do. Rachel was my coach and mentor, a stalwart advocate for the power of nonverbal communication. She was fond of saying that our bodies often betrayed our true feelings. Her wisdom transformed the way I approached conversations. As my mind wandered during the meeting, I remembered her insistence on open gestures, an open palm to indicate receptiveness, a slight lean toward the other person to show engagement. Today, as I prepared to speak with this potential client, I practiced a few of those open palms to dispel the tightness I felt. I could feel the tension between my shoulders ease ever so slightly. I just had to remember the cues, the subtleties of body language that build bridges in conversation. As I settled into the meeting, the client's initial demeanor was somewhat reserved, sitting back in his chair, arms crossed. I needed to create a sense of connection despite this barrier. I maintained steady eye contact, forcing myself to look into his eyes as I spoke earnestly about our vision. Rachel had taught me that eye contact can create a sense of intimacy, a subtle assurance that I was present with him, open to conversation. Each time my gaze met his, a small flicker of warmth ignited in his expression, softening the edges of suspicion. Every gesture needed to be intentional, arms uncrossed, gestures wide and encompassing. I began to articulate my ideas with movements that mirrored my passion, ensuring that each gesture was an invitation, a gentle reach toward him. The lines of his body began to relax. His arms slowly released their protective grip. I could sense the shift, like the unraveling of a tightly coiled spring. Then, amidst the ebb and flow of the conversation, an unplanned moment arose. He leaned forward, paying closer attention, intrigued by the possibilities. My heart raced. The stakes were high. Was this the breakthrough I needed, or was I still on shaky ground? But then, as he hesitated, uncertainty etched across his brow. I remembered Rachel's final piece of advice. When all else fails, listen. So I paused, allowing the silence to stretch just enough, creating a space for him to feel comfortable sharing his thoughts. My own body language remained engaged, nodding softly, ensuring he knew I was right there with him. The air felt charged, the tension palpable. Would he open up? Would we bridge the gap entirely? The moment hung delicately between us, a weighted invitation forging deeper trust, waiting for a connection that could seal the deal. Active listening, more than just hearing. It was a brisk November morning when I first realized just how vital active listening could be in my personal and professional life. My friend Mark and I had been working together on a project that demanded both creativity and cooperation. One day, as we were discussing our approach to a crucial negotiation, Mark leaned back in his chair, his expression contemplative. I could feel a lesson hovering just out of reach, waiting to be spoken. It was then I recalled the not-so-smooth negotiation I'd encountered just a week prior, one that had spiraled into a mess largely due to my lack of proper listening skills. During that previous ordeal, I had been so focused on what I wanted to say that I completely overlooked my counterpart's needs and concerns. As a result, my attempts at closing the deal fell flat. The negotiating table felt more like a battlefield, miscommunication rampant, and tensions high. If I had taken the time to summarize what they had shared, to reflect their worries back to them, I might have found common ground instead of heading toward an impasse. That memory prompted me to really lean in during my conversation with Mark. As I listened, I started employing a technique I had learned, summarizing. "So, what you're saying is," I began, mirroring back to Mark the sentiments he had just expressed. He nodded enthusiastically, visibly relieved that I was truly engaging in the conversation. It was in that moment I understood that active listening is a dance. It requires rhythm, timing, and attention, an intricate interplay where both parties are fully present. But there's more to it than just repeating words. It's about asking clarifying questions that invite deeper conversation. The way Mark responded validated my attempt, lighting up the room with a spark of recognition. I could feel the tension start to ease. Mark shared a particularly insightful story from his own experience, where the simple act of asking clarifying questions changed the entire trajectory of a discussion he had with a difficult client. The moment he probed deeper, the client opened up about concerns that had remained buried beneath surface level chatter. "Only then did I realize," Mark said, "that understanding isn't merely about processing words, but truly empathizing and engaging with the person before you." I sat there, captivated by his narrative. It was clear to me that listening could transform relationships, turning negotiations into collaborations and conflicts into dialogues. However, there was a catch. As I spoke with Mark, I felt a ripple of unease wash over me, a concern that maybe I didn't fully grasp the weight of what I was learning. What if I fell back into old habits? I could practically hear the faint echoes of that previous negotiation, reminding me just how easy it was to miss meaningful exchanges. It seemed crucial to remind myself that the true essence of listening doesn't just lie in hearing words. It's about the willingness to be vulnerable, to accept another's perspective without the preconceptions that often cloud our judgment. Our conversation continued, building momentum as we shared more thoughts. I began to implement strategies Mark had taught me while weaving my reflections into the fabric of our collaboration. In turn, I could see the way our connection deepened. The collaboration was no longer a mere task, but rather a shared journey that both of us wanted to thrive in. But just as I felt this newfound comfort set in, a startling tension slipped into our exchange. The stakes were rising, and I could sense our project was teetering toward a pivotal moment, one that would demand all the active listening I'd just begun to understand. Suddenly, Mark paused mid-sentence, staring over my shoulder with an intensity that snapped my focus back. "We need to consider what happens next in the negotiation," he said slowly, a contemplative furrow tight on his brow. "If we don't get this right, it could all fall apart. You realize how critical it is to listen to not just what they're saying, but what they're really trying to convey?" My heart raced as I acknowledged that this wasn't just a friendly conversation anymore. It was a lesson unfolding in real time. The pressure was palpable, and with it, the realization that the art of listening might soon be tested in ways I never anticipated. Understanding different communication styles. I remember the first time I met Elena at a team meeting. A project was on the line, and my natural inclination was to take a laid-back approach to discussions, allowing room for creativity and input from everyone. Elena, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of directness. "Here's the problem," she started, jumping immediately into the heart of the matter, her gaze probing every corner of the room for validation. I was taken aback. She was so different from me. Where I might gently circle around an issue to gauge the group's feelings, Elena aimed straight for the bullseye, her communication as sharp as a knife. This contrast in styles became a theme for our collaboration. I'd often find myself trying to temper her straightforwardness, softening the edges of her comments with empathy. But in the back of my mind, I realized there was strength in her approach that I often lacked. Over time, I learned to appreciate that her directness wasn't meant to steamroll others. Rather, it was her way of ensuring we didn't waste time, especially during negotiations, where clarity was paramount. Through our interactions, I began to understand the importance of adapting to different communication styles and how they can either forge connections or create walls. I began to collect a toolbox of strategies to identify various communication preferences, recognizing that not every conversation needed to dock in the same harbor. I honed in on cues, the way people phrased their requests, their body language, even their tone. Each style was a map to a person's preferences, leading me to navigate our discussions more effectively. But here's the kicker. Even with all this understanding, I still found myself stumbling when our negotiation was at a critical juncture. One fateful afternoon, the room was thick with unease as we faced a pivotal decision about budget allocations. Elena's directness was sharper than ever as she outlined the benefits of one approach over another without flinching. My heart raced. I could feel the stakes rising. I was terrified of adding to the tension, but also knew the importance of contributing my voice. I glanced around the table, gauging the tension mirrored on everyone's faces, torn between my urge to harmonize the atmosphere and the necessity to assert my views. As Elena presented her case, I caught a glimpse of how easily misunderstandings could spiral out of control in a multifaceted team like ours. Could we clarify Elena's decisiveness and my gentle nudging in the same breath? The environment felt electric, and I took a deep breath, determined to bridge our styles. What if my contribution could steer us away from an impending miscommunication? Chapter 4: The Art of Persuasion, Crafting Your Message. It was a sunny Tuesday afternoon when I found myself sitting across the table from a vendor, the air thick with anticipation and possibility. I had spent weeks analyzing my needs, estimating my budget, and envisioning the perfect partnership, but now it was time to put those thoughts into a cohesive message. As I glanced at the vendor's confident demeanor, I felt that old, familiar flutter of nerves. This was not just a conversation. It was a negotiation that could significantly impact my project's success. To begin, I took a deep breath and reminded myself of the essential steps I had mapped out. First, I needed to structure my thoughts clearly. Rather than diving into a long list of demands, I planned to highlight the core aspects of what I required: quality delivery, timely communication, and value for money. These were not just lofty ideals, they were pragmatic essentials that would define my expectations. I meticulously prioritized these key points, ensuring that each one would resonate with the vendor's goals as well. As the conversation unfolded, I leaned on these structured thoughts like a roadmap. With each word I spoke, I focused on clarity and precision. Delivering ahead of schedule is important to us, I stated, making it clear that this wasn't just a personal preference. It was vital for our operational success. The vendor nodded, and I could see the understanding in their eyes. Moments like these were pivotal, the friction between our needs gradually turning into a collaborative spirit. But crafting my message was not just about choosing the right words. It was also about the delivery. I adopted an open tone, ensuring that my body language mirrored my intentions. I leaned forward slightly, maintaining eye contact, and aimed to foster a sense of partnership rather than confrontation. The negotiations were not solely mine, they belonged to both of us. This subtle shift in perspective helped crystallize the bond we were forming. As we delved deeper and began discussing price, a hint of tension crept in. It was as if the room temperature had dropped the moment we started to talk numbers. I could feel the stakes rising. My heart raced as I realized that while I had been focused on clarity and structure, I also needed to navigate this emotive terrain with sensitivity. The vendor could sense the pressure. After all, this was a financial decision for them too. Here was where my technique would meet its ultimate test. With a deep breath, I decided to pivot. Instead of solely focusing on the budget, I drew attention back to the benefits of a partnership. By working together, we can ensure our brand values align, fostering a relationship that might yield better outcomes for both sides, I emphasized. I watched as their eyes softened, the atmosphere shifting from rigid demands to a flowing exchange of ideas. At this juncture, the dialogue became more than mere negotiation. It felt like a dance. The vendors shared their constraints, their aspirations, and along the way, I discovered opportunities for compromise. As the minutes ticked by, Clarity in my thoughts and the effectiveness of my delivery seemed to organically produce an understanding between us. I could sense we were edging closer to a resolution. Yet, just as we were aligning on crucial aspects, the vendor hesitated, and I could feel the air thickening again. "Just a moment," they said, a trace of concern clouding their expression. My heart raced once more. The tension felt almost palpable. What had gone wrong? Now was the moment for my message to shine brilliantly or falter under pressure. I steadied myself, recalling the tenets of clarity, empathy, and persuasive delivery. In that instant, everything I had prepared flooded back to me. This was more than a negotiation. It was about weaving a narrative that resonated with our mutual goals. "I understand that budget constraints can feel daunting," I said, choosing my words carefully. "What if we explored alternative solutions that might help us both?" The vendor looked pensive, their demeanor shifting once more as they mulled over my proposal. In those final moments of our negotiation, I realized that crafting my message was not just about what I needed to say, but also about how I made the vendor feel understood and valued. As we wrapped up our agreement, I understood that this delicate balance of clarity, empathy, and persuasive delivery had not only sealed our deal, but it also laid the foundation for a lasting partnership. It goes to show that in any interaction, especially in negotiation, the essence of crafting a powerful message lies equally in what we say and how we make others feel. Time stretched as their gazes held steady, the room humming with an unspoken tension. I felt the weight of their silence, punctuating the air like a ticking clock. The moment of truth stood just ahead of me, and I could only hope that the stories I'd woven had laid a foundation strong enough to support the leap I was about to take. I took a deep breath, preparing to invite them not only to invest in the business, but to believe in the narrative we could craft together. The story of what could be. The power of reciprocity negotiation, I've learned, is less about the hard sell and more about the delicate dance of give and take. The art of reciprocity is the cornerstone of this dance. I recall my first encounter with this principle when engaging with a software vendor for my burgeoning startup. It was a crisp autumn morning, and as I walked into the sleek conference room, I felt the familiar blend of excitement and apprehension that always accompanied these discussions. I was there, of course, to negotiate a deal that I hoped would benefit my company, but I quickly realized that how I approached the conversation could define its outcome. Before stepping through those glass doors, I reminded myself of a critical tenet of negotiation. Establishing a cooperative atmosphere right from the start can shift the entire dynamic. As I sat down across from the vendor's representative, I made a conscious decision to lead with generosity. I began by acknowledging the value of their software and expressed appreciation for the effort their team put into it. This wasn't merely flattery, it was a strategic move designed to set a tone of collaboration rather than competition. Immediately, I could see the tension ease from his shoulders as we settled into the discussion. As the conversation progressed, I found opportunities to share insights about my company's needs and even some challenges we were facing. With each small revelation, I noticed a corresponding openness in him. It was as if we were weaving an intricate tapestry of trust, where each thread of concession enhanced the strength of the whole. He reciprocated by offering insights on functionalities I hadn't considered, suggesting how their software could evolve alongside my business. By the time we reached the core of the negotiation, the financial specifics, I felt a palpable shift in the room, charged with a spirit of collaboration rather than contention. This is where the real power of reciprocity kicked in. I proposed a price that was on the higher end of my budget. To my surprise, instead of outright rejecting my offer, he paused, visibly weighing the possibilities. "What if we could meet halfway?" he suggested. Now, this wasn't just a concession. It was an invitation for deeper engagement. I had established the groundwork for mutual benefit earlier, and now we were not just making deals, but crafting a partnership. As we traded terms, molding the contract into something actionable and beneficial for both of us, the atmosphere was electric with potential. By the end of our negotiation, we had not only agreed on a price that felt right for both parties, but we also included provisions for ongoing support and training, further solidifying our future collaboration. Reflecting on that experience, it occurred to me how mutual concessions can sow the seeds for lasting relationships and favorable outcomes. Negotiation, like any relationship, thrives on the essence of reciprocity. When each party finds something of value, the results are far more rewarding. In the months that followed, as we implemented the software, I saw firsthand how our initial cooperative spirit continued to foster a supportive relationship. The vendor was responsive, proactive in offering updates, and invested in our success. These benefits far surpassed what I had initially expected, and I couldn't help but feel that the negotiation was just the beginning of a fruitful alliance. But even as I reveled in our achievements, I sensed an impending challenge on the horizon, one that threatened to test the very principles I held so dear. Little did I know that within weeks, I would face a situation that called into question everything I had learned about reciprocity and negotiation. Chapter 5: Navigating Difficult Conversations. Dealing with Emotional Triggers. It was a bright Thursday morning when I found myself sitting across from my business partner, Rachel, in a stark, glass-walled conference room. We were deep in the throes of a negotiation that felt crucial to the future of our partnership. As I glanced at her, I could feel the tension creeping in like an unwelcome guest. Rachel was passionate, driven, and when it came to business, fiercely protective of her ideas. I admired her for it, but in that moment, I sensed the brewing storm. Her emotional triggers had been set off, and it was up to me to navigate through them without capsizing the entire discussion. The conversation had started smoothly enough, comfortable laughs and light banter about how we would celebrate our inevitable success. Yet, as we began discussing numbers, her body language changed. Her eyebrows knitted together, arms crossed defensively. I could almost hear the gears turning, transforming her focus from collaboration to confrontation. I recognized my own triggers lurking in the shadows, ready to ambush me if I didn't maintain my composure. There was a time when I might have reacted impulsively, defending my position fiercely, or worse, withdrawing completely. But today, recognizing these emotional currents provided me with a lifeline. In dealing with Rachel's escalating emotions, I opted to employ a technique I'd learned called grounding. It involved taking a step back, physically and emotionally, and observing the conversation almost as if I were a spectator. "Let's take a moment here," I suggested, my voice steady but warm. "I can see this is an important point for both of us." In that instant, I intentionally lowered my own defenses, acknowledging her feelings while keeping my own in check. I steered the talk toward why these numbers mattered, connecting them with our shared vision. This strategy didn't erase the tension, but it helped diffuse it, paving a pathway for more constructive dialogue. What surprised me most was how quickly Rachel relaxed when she felt heard. I began jotting down key phrases she expressed, affirming her stance even amidst disagreement. It was true, I had my own triggers too, and sometimes those little ripples of resentment could easily escalate into waves of turmoil. Recognizing this duality, I reminded myself of the foundations we had built together, often recalling the early days where we both championed each other's ideas. As we worked through the numbers, realigning our perspectives, I could hear the gradual thawing of the ice between us. But just as things began to settle, a comment escaped my lips that I hadn't fully thought through. "If we could look at these costs differently, perhaps we could save more for reinvestment." To my horror, Rachel's expression morphed again, a flash of irritation flickering in her eyes. "It seems you don't see the value in what I've proposed," she snapped, her voice rising. Instantly, I felt my heart race, the familiar tightness in my chest warning me of an impending emotional surge. I had ventured too close to a trigger without realizing it, barely holding on to the reins of my composure. In that moment, everything I had learned about emotional regulation kicked in, like training wheels steadied on a bicycle. I paused, took a deep breath, and reminded myself, don't fire back. Instead, I focused on my breathing, slowing it down as I forced my thoughts to crystallize. "Rachel," I said softly, "that's not what I meant. I genuinely value your proposal. I'm just exploring alternatives to maximize our potential." Her jaw clenched, but I could see a flicker of understanding cross her face. Perhaps, just perhaps, she was beginning to recognize the cracks in her own emotional armor, to see that we were not opponents here, but partners striving for a common goal. As the conversation moved forward, we spent time addressing her concerns directly, peeling back the emotional layers surrounding the issue at hand. It dawned on me then that managing emotional triggers wasn't just a personal battle, it was a shared responsibility. In knowing ourselves, we offered the other person the chance to feel safe and understood. With each minute, as we spoke more honestly, I felt those initial storm clouds of tension dissipate, revealing a clearer path forward. Continuing our negotiation together became an act of forging connections, rather than an exercise of competing interests. By the end of that intense meeting, we came away with a thrusting commitment that seemed unscathed by the emotional turmoil we had faced. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. We weren't just negotiators, we were teammates. Conquering those emotional whirlwinds had transformed what could have been a derailing conflict into an opportunity for growth. Both Rachel and I had learned that by recognizing and managing emotional triggers effectively, we could navigate even the most difficult conversations and emerge not just intact, but more unified than before. Staying calm under pressure. It was a Monday morning, and the atmosphere in the office was thick with tension. I had barely settled in with my coffee when I received the call. A critical deal necessary for our quarter's success had hit an unexpected snag. Our main supplier was threatening to pull out unless we met an impossible demand. My heart raced, and my stomach twisted into knots. It felt as though the walls were closing in, and I had to negotiate terms with our supplier within the hour. In the midst of this chaos, I recalled Julia, my colleague, and the mindfulness workshop we had attended a few months back. As I paced back and forth in my office, I remembered her soft voice describing the breathing techniques that could ground someone in a moment of crisis. Breath first, then speak, she had advised, emphasizing that a clear mind could make or break any negotiation. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply through my nose, and exhaled slowly through my mouth. The frantic rhythm of my heartbeat gradually synced with the soothing cadence of my breath, reminding me that I had the power to control my reactions. With my mind slightly clearer, I started to strategize. The workshop had not only equipped me with techniques for calming down, but it also emphasized the importance of being present. I remembered the role of active listening. Instead of jumping into defensive modes, I could try to understand the underlying concerns of our supplier. As I approached the call, I penned down a few key points to discuss, all while ensuring they stemmed from a place of empathy rather than confrontation. When the call began, the tension was palpable. I could hear the underlying frustration in my contact's voice and felt the weight of the situation bearing down on me. Yet, I relied on my breathing, reminding myself to stay calm and focused. I asked open-ended questions, allowing him to voice his frustrations without interrupting. This simple technique seemed to soften his stance. With each passing moment, as I listened, I found myself feeling less like an adversary and more like a problem solver working alongside him. The negotiation was far from easy, and with each counter-proposal, my heart quickened, but my resolve strengthened. There were moments when the stakes felt impossibly high, and I fought the urge to panic. It was then I remembered to break the pressure down further, to acknowledge my own feelings while keeping the narrative of positivity for both parties. As my colleague had taught me, self-acknowledgement of pressure allows for more effective communication. I practically felt the weight of the world settle onto my shoulders, but I carried it, transforming the challenge into an opportunity to find mutual benefit. After what felt like an eternity of negotiation, we reached a compromise that addressed both parties' concerns. I felt a mix of relief and triumph. The deal was salvaged, the crisis resolved. As I hung up the phone, I realized I had survived, not just the negotiation, but the pressure itself. In the end, it wasn't just about getting that deal done. It was about the resilience I discovered when faced with chaos. Afterward, I reflected on the techniques I learned with Julia that day. They were not only useful in negotiating, but also in navigating everyday stresses. Breathing, listening, and maintaining a calm presence were my new tools. They've since guided me through many other high-pressure moments, proving that composure in chaos is not just a skill, it's a vital ingredient for success and well-being. Remember, The key is not to take the turmoil personally, but to anchor yourself amidst the storm. Strategies for conflict resolution. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when the storm erupted between my sibling and me. The disagreement had been brewing for some time, a result of mounting responsibilities that we both felt were unfairly distributed. But this particular evening was different. Tension crackled in the air as we exchanged sharp words. It was a familiar dance, yet this time I felt an urgency to break the cycle. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the strategies for conflict resolution that I had recently learned. It was my moment to step up, to evolve from mere reactions to constructive dialogue. The first step, I discovered, was to identify our common objectives. I let my sibling voice their grievances, listening intently. Our underlying goal began to surface. We both wanted a harmonious home environment, free from resentment and misunderstandings. With a little prompting, I shared my perspective, acknowledging their feelings while also expressing my own. In that moment, I realized that we weren't adversaries. Instead, we were collaborators seeking a shared solution. This shift in mindset made all the difference. As we began to brainstorm potential solutions, I implemented the strategy of focusing on we instead of I. I gently reminded myself that we were on the same team, and every suggestion, from adjusting our schedules to redistributing chores, was a stepping stone toward resolution. Our conversation flowed more easily as we mapped out responsibilities, prioritizing transparency. I offered to take on tasks my sibling found particularly burdensome, while they agreed to handle others that I had previously taken for granted. Negotiating these roles transformed our conflict into a collaborative effort. But just as we were reaching a consensus, a familiar anxiety crept back into the conversation, threatening the fragile unity we had built. As we wrapped up our discussion, old grievances hovered like dark clouds. A pang of doubt gnawed at my confidence. Had we truly resolved anything, or were we merely delaying the inevitable? It was then that we confronted the tension that had been festering beneath the surface. I recalled the importance of addressing the emotional aspects of the disagreement, not just the logistical ones. Taking a leap, I brought up past resentments with honesty instead of blame. That was my daring move, my way of shedding light on the shadows that threatened to cloud our recent progress. Despite the vulnerability, it sparked a deeper conversation. My sibling opened up too, revealing feelings of being overlooked, as if their contributions to our home were invisible. This was the crux of our conflict all along, an overlooked desire for recognition. With this realization, we worked together to set up a system of checks and balances, openly acknowledging each other's efforts weekly. In doing so, we were not only managing responsibilities, but also cultivating mutual respect and understanding. As we wrote down our commitments and the intentions behind them, I felt a flicker of hope ignite between us, but I knew we had only scratched the surface. After all, resolving conflict isn't merely a one-time event. It's an ongoing journey requiring dedication and care. The shadows remained as reminders that our harmony could waver. It was clear that we had more work to do. Though I had equipped myself with valuable conflict resolution strategies and actionable insights, the true test lay in putting them into practice over the long haul. As we stepped back from our exchange, I sensed we were at a crossroads, revitalized yet aware of the potential for new contention to arise. How we navigated these future challenges would ultimately define not only our relationship, but also the lessons we would carry forward into all aspects of our lives, together and apart. Chapter 6. Making compromises that work. Identifying acceptable trade-offs. It was a crisp autumn morning when I found myself seated across the table from David, the service provider I had been negotiating with for weeks. I could sense the tension in the air, a mix of hope and apprehension for both of us. We knew we had to strike a deal on the support service for my small business, but we were both holding on to our positions like lifebuoys in a stormy sea. My goal was clear. I wanted quality service at a price that wouldn't sink my budget. David, on the other hand, had to maintain his company's bottom line while ensuring he didn't compromise their service quality. The stakes felt high as we dove into the specifics. The first step was to openly discuss our needs and constraints. I shared my budget limitations, laying down the figures, while also expressing my appreciation for the value David's services brought to the table. He nodded and countered with his understanding of the industry standards. It was important for me to listen carefully. After all, I couldn't negotiate effectively without fully grasping the landscape. As we delved deeper, I gently pushed for clarity on what aspects of their service were flexible. Each point of discussion felt like a dance. A careful step forward followed by a necessary retreat as we both gauged each other's reactions. Hours passed, and just when a sense of defeat began to creep in, I remembered a lesson from my past. Negotiation is often about discovering trade-offs. I shifted tactics and asked David what he considered negotiable. This question opened a door to a realm we hadn't explored yet: specific contract terms, response times, even the type of support I'd receive. I shared my priorities. Quick response times were non-negotiable, but perhaps I could forgo some supplementary features that I initially thought essential. This back and forth gave me a glimmer of hope as I saw the possibilities excitingly unfold on the table before us. Eventually, we found ourselves standing on the precipice of a potential agreement, yet an air of uncertainty still loomed over us. "What if?" I started, my heart racing as I introduced a new idea that had been simmering in my mind. My suggestion floated in the air, hanging between negotiation and desperation. David glanced at me, his brow furrowed, as he processed my words. Could we possibly arrange a trial period that would allow me to assess the service while giving him the security of a shorter commitment? The seconds felt like minutes as I awaited his response, anxious of whether this idea could be the compromise we both needed. The tension peaked, and I could almost hear the clock ticking louder as David considered my proposal. In that split moment, I realized this negotiation was much more than just a transaction. It was a representation of our interconnected needs. Would David see the merit in what seemed like an unconventional option? Or would he retreat back into his position, leaving us stranded at this impasse? I held my breath, feeling the weight of the moment, prepared for either outcome, yet desperately hoping for a shared solution that would benefit us both and allow me to breathe easier again. The role of creativity in solutions. It was one of those tense moments in the conference room where time felt like molasses. A group of us, an eclectic mix of personalities and specialties, huddled around a table, burdened with our own preconceived notions about the problem at hand. Faced with a disagreement that seemed insurmountable, I realized we were standing at the edge of conventional thinking, teetering on the brink of stagnation. I could see it in the body language of my colleagues, the furrowed brows, the shifting in their seats, the faint sighs. Solutions felt distant, like an unreachable horizon. Then, just as the air thickened with frustration, Sam broke through the haze of our collective monotony. He had this remarkable ability to turn the mundane into magnificent. "What if we flip the problem on its head?" he suggested, his eyes alight with that familiar spark of mischief. A flicker of curiosity ignited within our group. What if we did? We leaned in, encouraged by a glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, creativity could lead us out of our deadlock. As we launched into a brainstorming session, the atmosphere began to shift. Instead of detailing the limitations of the last proposal, we opened up the floor to wild ideas, quirky concepts that usually felt too far-fetched for a serious discussion. No idea was too silly, no suggestion dismissed. Concepts flew around the room like confetti, each one building on the last, weaving a tapestry of possibilities. I could feel tension ease, and the laughter began to bubble forth, laced with genuine camaraderie. I looked around the table and saw everyone, even the skeptics, visibly lightening under the weight of their own rigid perspectives. As Sam expertly nudged us along, I felt a surge of gratitude. He was our catalyst, reminding us that innovation often thrives in the most unexpected corners. The group's diverse backgrounds became a treasure trove of insights. We weren't just colleagues, we were a mosaic of creativity. When someone said, "Let's merge our initial proposals into a new framework," it was like the final piece of our puzzle clicked into place. I could sense the shift from anxiety to exhilaration, and that's when I knew we were onto something potent. A solution that didn't just resolve our disagreement, but enlivened our project. But as we delved deeper into these innovative ideas, a whisper of doubt crept into the room. How could we present our unconventional solution to the higher ups who were, let's just say, less inclined to embrace anything outside their comfort zone? It was as if we had dared to step out onto a precipice in search of a leap that might just lead to a glorious landing or a catastrophic fall. I could see hesitation flickering in my teammates' eyes, the excitement tempered by fear. We risked ridicule, rejection, even worse, the feeling of letting our guard down only to watch our creativity dismissed. And just like that, the atmosphere shifted once again. Would we muster the courage to present our radical concepts to the decision makers, or would we retreat into the safety of the familiar, allowing our unique solutions to slip silently back into obscurity? The clock ticked mercilessly overhead, reminding us that we were at a critical juncture. I felt the weight of the moment, heavy yet exhilarating, a call for bravery in the face of the unknown. It was then I took a deep breath and spoke, reminding everyone of the power we had harnessed in that room. This is our chance to transform not just our project, but how we approach problems in the future, I said, drawing on every ounce of conviction I had. Let's take this risk together. My voice, laced with a mix of determination and fear, became a rallying call for creativity, challenging us all to foster an environment that celebrated boldness over predictability, documenting agreements clearly. After months of back and forth negotiations, I found myself sitting at a small cafe, strong coffee in hand, contemplating the damage a lack of clarity had wreaked. I had just come out of a meeting, or more accurately, a heated debate, where vague promises had ballooned into misunderstandings that could only be described as a perfect storm. It was embarrassing to admit, but I was partly to blame. The words spoken were clouded with ambiguity, and in my eagerness to reach an agreement, I failed to nail down specifics. This, I learned the hard way, would cost not just time but trust, the invisible currency of any relationship. As I sat in that cafe, I couldn't help but reflect on the pivotal moment when my resolve to document agreements clearly took shape. A few months prior, I had been tangled in an elusive deal with a potential partner. We exchanged what seemed like ironclad commitments over a series of meetings, but as time went on, the inconsistencies began to surface. When I received an email outlining our understanding, it dawned on me that our interpretations of what was promised differed wildly. Red flags flapped feverishly at my senses. This was a classic case of vague promises leading to a messy outcome. I knew then that I had to create a system. After all, clarity breeds trust and efficiency. It was time to take actionable steps toward ensuring mutual understanding. With that thought swirling in my mind, I started drafting a simple template for documenting agreements, focusing on best practices that I wished I had used before. First, I learned to invite all parties involved to co-create the documentation. When everyone contributes, they not only gain a clearer understanding, but also a sense of ownership. Next, I adopted the habit of summarizing discussions at the end of meetings. The exercise forced me to articulate what was agreed upon, no more room for ambiguity. And lastly, I embraced the power of written confirmation. After every discussion, I would send out a recap email outlining key points, deadlines, and responsibilities, creating a reference point that we could all return to if confusion arose. But here's the kicker. Even the best intentions can go awry. Just as I was building this new foundation of clarity, I faced an unexpected challenge from my partner, who suddenly claimed that the agreement we'd crafted wasn't binding because of a misplaced sentence. The room felt charged as I replayed our conversations in my head, searching for the elusive moment where I might have faltered. I could feel the tension rising. I had to stand my ground. I pulled out my notes and expertly navigated through our discussions, ready to put my newfound principles to the test. But what would happen if the agreement we crafted truly was as ambiguous as they claimed? The stakes were high, and clarity felt like a distant goal, one I desperately needed to reach. Chapter 7: The Negotiation Environment. Choosing the right setting. When I first dipped my toes into the world of negotiation, I underestimated the power of setting. I remember the initial meetings where I wore my brand new suit, strutting into glass-walled conference rooms, feeling every bit the professional. But despite the polished appearance, I often left those meetings feeling drained and unsatisfied. Why? Because the setting felt sterile. like a boardroom devoid of life, more focused on authority than connection. It wasn't until I found myself sitting in a cozy corner of a local coffee shop, a steaming mug in hand, that the light bulb truly clicked. The ambiance was warm, the chatter of other patrons creating a backdrop of normalcy. It felt like a conversation between friends rather than a negotiation. I was negotiating a partnership with a colleague I'd known for years, and in that relaxed environment, we not only reached an agreement, but also deepened our relationship. The unpretentious surroundings stripped away barriers and led to honest discussions that might not have happened in a formal setting. Over the years, I have learned that the right setting can make all the difference. I recall another instance where I was tasked with leading a negotiation for a sizable contract. Wading into another high rise with cold corporate vibes felt all too familiar, but this time I had a plan. I suggested we meet in a nearby park where trees swayed gently and sunlight filtered through the leaves. As we strolled and talked, tension dissipated. By the end of that negotiation, we had not only sealed an important deal, but had also shared personal stories that forged a bond beyond business. It's fascinating how the sounds of nature seem to weave camaraderie into our discussions. But it's not just about finding a warm coffee shop or a sunny park. Each negotiation needs a tailored approach. I learned this during a crucial negotiation with a competing firm. It was initially set to unfold in their stark boardroom, but knowing their culture was traditional and somewhat rigid, I advocated for meeting at an upscale restaurant. The environment sparked subtle yet important shifts in our discussions. Over a shared plate of appetizers, we laughed, lightening the mood, and eventually moving into serious topics with a newfound comfort. This change transformed our relationship from adversarial to collaborative, and we walked away with a mutual understanding that words alone wouldn't have achieved. Yet, there are times when even the best environments can be sabotaged. I experienced this when negotiating with a particularly tough counterpart who thrived on intimidation. We met in a fashionable high-rise office overlooking the city, where the meticulously organized furniture mirrored their clean-cut image. I could feel the chill in the air as we exchanged pleasantries, but the moment I tried to suggest a more open approach to collaboration, I was met with dismissive remarks. The setting, while impressive, evoked a sense of competition rather than cooperation, and eventually we hit an impasse. That day taught me a valuable lesson. The setting should align not just with your style, but also with your counterpart's comfort. As I reflect on these experiences, it's clear that setting isn't just a backdrop, it's an active participant in the negotiation dance. Choosing the right environment can set the tone, establish trust, and facilitate open dialogue, but it must also be adaptable to the nuances of each situation. And while I have my preferences, those warm marketplaces or cozy cafes, it's essential to remain flexible and thoughtful about where negotiations take place. After all, negotiations aren't just transactional. They're about human connection. As my journey continues, I invite you to consider the settings of your own negotiations. Whether it's a bustling coffee shop or a lavish conference room, choose wisely. Understand the dynamics at play and ensure that the space serves you and your objectives well. You might just find, as I did, that the right setting has the power to transform a routine negotiation into an enriching experience, creating a positive atmosphere. When I think back to some of the most intense negotiations I experienced at my previous job, a vivid memory comes to mind. A table strewn with papers, voices raised, and a palpable tension that hung in the air like a thick fog. In situations like these, I discovered a surprising truth. The atmosphere we create can dramatically influence the outcome of our discussions. It was in these moments that I learned the immense value of cultivating a positive atmosphere. Just a simple smile exchanged could shift the focus from conflict to connection. One particularly challenging meeting was with a client who had recently faced setbacks due to our product's shortcomings. The mood was somber, and as I prepared to step into the conference room, I decided to take a deep breath and put on my best smile. I reminded myself that empathy and warmth could go a long way. As I entered, I started by expressing genuine appreciation for their loyalty despite the issues they had endured. I could see the surprise flicker across their faces. The initial tension began to ease almost immediately. Instead of engaging in a blame game, we found ourselves discussing solutions, united in the goal of improvement rather than divided by failure. Creating a welcoming ambiance doesn't just stop with one warm gesture. It involves a consistent approach to enhancing interpersonal dynamics. I've learned a few invaluable tips along the way. When setting up a meeting, consider the environment: soft lighting, comfortable seating, and a space that encourages open dialogue. Invite everyone to check their agendas at the door, figuratively speaking, by framing the conversation around shared objectives. Far too often, our focus turns inward, concentrating on our own needs and frustrations. Instead, I urge you to make space for interests and concerns, crafting an atmosphere rooted in camaraderie. Another effective technique I utilized was the power of appreciation. Prior to every negotiation, I'd make it a point to acknowledge something commendable about the other party, perhaps their tenacity in the industry or the creativity they demonstrated in their last project. This isn't flattery, it's building bridges. As we recognize each other's strengths, the walls of defensiveness begin to crumble, allowing us to approach discussions with openness and a collective drive for mutual success. However, the stakes were high, and not every negotiation was smooth sailing. There were instances when I felt the familiar tension creeping back in, threatening to seize control of the meeting. The trick, I found, was to remain vigilant, to catch those moments when frustrations began to surface and address them before they inflated into larger conflicts. Humor would often come to my rescue. A light-hearted comment at the right time could transform the entire atmosphere, ushering in laughter where there was once furrowed brows. Still, the challenge remained: how to maintain this positive atmosphere when disagreements escalated. It requires practice and the courage to steer the ship through stormy waters. I learned to pause, take a breath, and invite others to do the same. By creating space for everyone to express their thoughts, even the tough ones, we could dismantle the negative energy before it spiraled out of control. It was a delicate balance, and certainly not something that always went according to plan. As I navigated these complexities, I concluded that fostering a positive atmosphere is not a magic wand that instantly resolves disputes. Rather, it's a vital foundation upon which constructive dialogue is built. Sure, there were times when my efforts fell flat, moments where, despite my best intentions, the atmosphere soured. These experiences taught me resilience and the importance of adaptability. I left those situations with a renewed commitment to approach future negotiations with unwavering positivity and authenticity. Reflecting on my journey, I'm continuously reminded of the profound impact a positive atmosphere can have on our interactions. The challenge lies in consistently nurturing that environment, especially when tensions rise. But in those unpredictable moments, I found that staying true to a hopeful, open-hearted approach often opened the door to unexpected solutions, an essential tool worth wielding in any negotiation. Using technology to your advantage. As I sat there, staring at the screen, the little green dot indicating my colleague's presence flickered to life. It was a chilly November afternoon, and here we were, preparing for a high-stakes negotiation over a contract that could shape our departments for the next few years. The video call felt surreal, almost like I could reach out and touch those pixels, transforming into faces. This blend of anticipation and uncertainty made me reflect on how technology can both enhance and hinder negotiations. Reflecting on that day, I remember diving into the negotiation with enthusiasm. We had the deck shared on the screen, neatly outlined points that we both agreed on to start. The unspoken agreement to help each other bridge gaps instead of creating them led to a smooth exchange of ideas. It was like dancing. We moved effortlessly with the rhythm, using the collaborative platform to jot down notes that morphed into actionable points. My colleague and I nodded as we highlighted each other's suggestions, and for a glimmering moment, everything felt perfectly in sync. Yet, as the meeting progressed, reality hit like a dissonant note. Just as we delved into the crux of the negotiation, her screen froze. An unbearable silence lingered. I could see her face, the panic flashing in her eyes, waiting for the connection to revive. I took a deep breath, jotting down my thoughts to maintain momentum while mentally rehearsing my next points. This experience taught me that even a small hiccup could disrupt the flow, and one must be prepared to navigate through technological setbacks. But what about the gadgets and tools we wield? Knowing when to leverage them is as crucial as understanding when to disengage. I advocate for using screen sharing and interactive platforms as they can streamline discussions and foster collaboration. However, this experience also illuminated the distractions lurking just beneath the surface. Notifications pinged at random intervals, drawing my focus to a half-forgotten email that could wait. I oscillated between engagement and distraction, a fine line that all negotiators tread. As we waded through the tricky waters of that negotiation, I recalled advice I had once received. Technology should serve you, not the other way around. This suddenly resonated deeply. I decided to propose a quick Zoom break while her team figured out the tech issue. It was a pause that gave her a chance to reconnect, and it worked. The discussion flowed back into rhythm with renewed energy. I took that moment as an opportunity to reflect on our progress and recalibrate our strategy. The key takeaway? Embrace technology, but respect its imperfections. Each platform offers its unique set of features, yet there's a learning curve associated with them. Being mindful of these quirks fosters resilience, patience, and ultimately, understanding. In the end, we both walked away from that screen having achieved more than just an agreement. We built a stronger rapport, one bolstered by the challenges we had surmounted together. As I reflect on that negotiation, a mixture of sweet successes and daunting technical missteps, I remind myself of the emotional journey we embarked upon. The real magic lies not only in closing deals, but in making the most of what we have at hand, adapting to every twist and turn in the process. So as you approach your next virtual negotiation, remember, let technology be your ally. Embrace its capabilities, acknowledge its limitations, and prepare to dance through the inevitable hiccups that come your way. Chapter 8: Cultural Sensitivity in Negotiations. Understanding Cultural Differences. Traveling abroad for business has always struck a chord of excitement within me. The thrill came not just from visiting new places, but from engaging with different cultures, understanding their depths, and navigating the uncharted waters of negotiation styles. I remember my first negotiation in Japan, where every bow carried weight and silence spoke volumes. Initially, I mistook gestures and pauses for disinterest. My American marvel of persistent dialogue just didn't seem to fit there. As I scrutinized the room, my colleagues from Tokyo shared their thoughts thoughtfully, embodying a cultural etiquette I had yet to fully comprehend. Each culture, I learned, brings its own set of expectations and behaviors to the table. In contrast, during a meeting in Germany, the precision and directness felt like a breath of fresh air. There were no frills, no masks, just the raw dialogue of ideas and counteroffers. I found myself captivated by their efficiency, marveling at how their negotiation process, stripped of unnecessary embellishments, created a poignant clarity. Yet, the starkness, too, revealed its own challenges. I realized too late that without the small talk that greases the wheels, my counterparts might have viewed me as curt or even rude. Through these encounters, I began to see that every culture has its unique negotiation style, each holding vital lessons within its playbook. These experiences ignited a fire within me, the fire to embrace and understand cultural differences, not just as challenges, but as learning opportunities. I embraced the idea that cultural awareness is not merely an accessory for fruitful negotiations, it's a necessity. By sharing laughter over tea in China or respecting the rituals of introductions in South Africa, I slowly learned how these moments foster respect and understanding. It's fascinating how, at a negotiation table, barriers dissolve when individuals are met with appreciation for their cultural nuances. Every negotiation is a delicate dance of learning, respect, and adaptation that can lead to far more fruitful outcomes than mere transactional exchanges. Yet, as I prepared for my most ambitious negotiation yet in Brazil, my heart raced with anticipation and apprehension. I envisioned vibrant discussions laced with humor, the way the locals often described their meetings. Still, the thought of misreading exuberant gestures loomed like a specter in the back of my mind. Perhaps it was the notion of participating in a negotiation amidst the backdrop of samba rhythms that pushed the stakes higher. I practiced flexibility in my approach, reminding myself that adaptability is as essential as preparation. As the day of the negotiation approached, the weight of cultural responsibility bore down on me. Would I successfully traverse this mosaic of cultural differences, or would I stumble, misstep, and falter into misunderstandings? Only time would reveal whether I could merge my learnings into this new landscape. I was about to step into a negotiation where the pulse of the culture would resonate deeply in every interaction. And as I stood outside the conference room, the sweet aroma of the local cuisine wafted by, I took a deep breath and smiled, reminding myself that within these cultural differences lay not just obstacles, but gateways to deeper connections, and perhaps a successful negotiation. Adapting strategies globally. The sun dipped below the horizon as I sat in a bustling cafe in the heart of Mumbai, feeling the weight of my task ahead. I was gearing up for negotiations with a partner unlike any I had encountered before. Navigating cultural nuances on the global stage was no simple feat, but I was determined to master it. Each sip of my chai was a reminder that the challenge at hand was not just about numbers or contracts. It was about understanding a diverse tapestry of human experience, values, and expectations. In these negotiations, I learned early on that a one-size-fits-all strategy simply wouldn't cut it. I remember my first overseas meeting, where I confidently laid out my proposal, only to be met with polite nods that revealed little. It struck me then that I had approached the situation through my own cultural lens, unaware of the subtle intricacies at play. I had failed to recognize the importance of building relationships before jumping into business. It was a lesson learned the hard way. Trust is the foundation of negotiation, and in many cultures, relationships take precedence over the deal itself. My next attempt was different. I spent time immersing myself in the local customs, attending festivals, and even taking language classes. I found that humor and storytelling were invaluable tools in bridging the gap between us. A well-placed joke could lighten the mood, dissolve tension, and create a bond that was much harder to establish with just formalities. These experiences prepared me to adapt my strategies to align with the values of my international partners. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. I vividly recall a negotiation in Tokyo that almost derailed entirely. I had come prepared with a comprehensive presentation, but I was met with silence. Moments felt like hours as I watched my partner shift uncomfortably in their seat. That's when I realized I hadn't offered them the floor to express their thoughts. Japan values consensus and harmony. My assertiveness was perceived as aggressiveness. I paused, acknowledging the discomfort, and opened the conversation to them. Their expressions gradually softened, and we ended up crafting an agreement that was favorable for both parties. Through these diverse encounters, I became acutely aware of the necessity for flexibility. Every culture brings its own set of values and communication styles to the table, and as negotiators, we must adapt our approaches accordingly. I found that being culturally competent goes beyond a mere understanding. It requires sensitivity, respect, and most importantly, genuine curiosity about the other party's viewpoints. Despite these successes, I still face challenges even in places I thought I understood. One late afternoon in Berlin, I was attempting to finalize a partnership that could propel my business to new heights. The conversation seemed straightforward until a sudden shift occurred. My German counterpart raised a concern I hadn't anticipated: sustainability practices. While we discussed many aspects of the partnership, I had overlooked this crucial topic. The room grew tense. It felt as though the air had thickened with my failure to consider their priorities. It was a stark reminder that in global negotiations, ignorance can swiftly lead to breakdowns. As the sun began to set on my time there, I could see my goal slipping from my grasp. I took a breath and asked for a moment to regroup. Reflecting on our earlier conversations, I shifted the dialogue. I acknowledged their concerns and offered to integrate sustainability metrics into our project plan. Their faces immediately softened, and with this small act, I felt a surge of hope. Moments later, we were back on track, resolving not just the outstanding issues, but establishing a shared vision that bridged our perspectives. In closing this chapter of Lessons Learned, I encourage anyone stepping onto the global stage to embrace the discomfort that comes with cross cultural negotiations. It's a journey of adaptation and understanding. Listening deeply and being willing to adjust your strategy can turn tensions into triumphs. As I reflect on those negotiating tables worldwide, I recognize that the greatest outcomes arise from a heart willing to connect with another, no matter how different they may be. Respecting diverse perspectives. During a particularly challenging negotiation, I sat across from a table full of colleagues and clients. The air was thick with tension, each person jostling for their position, their opinions sharp and ready to sprint down any rabbit hole. Little did we know, these very differences would pave the way for innovation. It was in that moment, as I listened to my teammates share their diverse perspectives, that I realized just how essential respect was in our discussions. As the discussions unfolded, I noticed varied viewpoints emerging, some grounded in personal experience, others in data-driven research. Each voice, from the most seasoned veteran to the rookie just finding their footing, brought something invaluable to the table. It was tempting to dismiss certain opinions, especially when they conflicted with my own. But I reminded myself that such dismissals could stifle creativity and compromise. Instead, I leaned into the energy of debate, allowing the room to breathe with conversation instead of judgment. To foster an inclusive negotiating environment, I employed a few strategies I had learned throughout my career. First, I encouraged open dialogue by asking each participant to share their thoughts without interruption. This set a precedent for respect, allowing everyone to feel valued. As each person spoke, I made a conscious effort to acknowledge their contributions, echoing back what I heard to show understanding. This led to rich discussions where innovative ideas blossomed, and suddenly, differing viewpoints weren't a hindrance but a catalyst for creative solutions. However, as our discussions progressed, we approached the final point where agendas began to clash significantly. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted, voices grew louder, and the heat of disagreement simmered just beneath the surface. It was a delicate moment, a potential breaking point where we could either spiral into chaos or channel our collective frustration into something productive. I took a deep breath, sensing that it was time to refocus on our shared goal, to find a resolution that honored everyone's perspective. In that critical instant, I called for a brief pause. I suggested we regroup on the values that brought us to the negotiation in the first place and reflected on what each of us wanted to achieve collectively. I could see the furrowed brows relaxing slightly as we took a step back. We had to remember, our differences did not divide us, but instead painted a richer picture of the problem we were trying to solve. It was an experience that pushed me to fully embrace the idea that respectful dialogue and understanding could forge a strong foundation even in the most polarized environments. When we returned to the table, something had shifted, almost tangibly. The tensions had cooled. With renewed energy, we delved into each other's ideas, weaving together threads of thought into a tapestry of potential solutions. I was amazed at how, when we all felt seen and heard, our collective brainstorming produced outcomes we hadn't envisioned alone. By the end of that negotiation, not only had we achieved a groundbreaking agreement, but we also cultivated a deeper respect for one another, something that would echo in future endeavors. It was a moment not just of victory, but of education, reminding me of the power of embracing and respecting diverse perspectives. I encourage you to create spaces in your negotiations where every voice is valued and where the wealth of our differences can inspire the innovative spark needed for solutions. It's in this respect that we find true collaboration and ultimately, success. Chapter 9: Leveraging Power Dynamics. Identifying sources of power negotiation has always felt a bit like a dance to me. The rhythm of back and forth, the careful maneuvering to keep from stepping on toes, and the grace required to extract what we want without stepping away bruised. Yet, throughout my journey in mastering this art, the most pertinent lesson has been about understanding the sources of power, not just my own, but that of others. It was a revelation that completely shifted my approach and empowered me to navigate negotiations with newfound confidence. One morning, I found myself in a tense negotiation with a supplier who held the keys to my project's success. It was a pivotal moment, and I realized I needed to assess not just my leverage, but theirs as well. I recall sitting across the table from him, his poker face betraying nothing. Yet, beneath my nerves, I could feel my heart racing as I internalized every subtle gesture. Was his confidence rooted in simple arrogance, or did he possess information I lacked? What resources did he hold that were critical to the outcome we were chasing? My research and preparation for this moment was invaluable. I had uncovered a list of potential sources of power, knowledge, alternatives, relationships, and the all important context of the negotiation itself. By recognizing my strengths, namely, my preparation and understanding of our mutual goals, I realized I could assert a form of power that might level the playing field. The magic lay not so much in having all the cards, but in playing the hand I had with full strategic consciousness. I took a breath, relaxed my shoulders, and decided to approach the negotiation as a collaboration rather than a battle. As we began, I leaned into open questions, allowing him to share conditions that mattered to him. The moment he began to talk more about his struggles, I seized the opportunity to understand his position. It was enlightening. He revealed that his company was facing supply chain issues that had increased his costs dramatically. In that instant, I realized my power was not in making a hard offer, but rather in leveraging the empathy I had developed during our conversation. I could create a solution that would not only benefit my needs, but also alleviate some of the pressure he was experiencing. Now, this experience taught me that power is frequently fluid. It changes depending on the dynamic of the situation and the perceptions involved. Just as I began to feel I had the upper hand, however, he pivoted. "I appreciate your understanding," he said, his tone shifting ever so slightly. "But at the end of the day, the market sets the price. If I compromise, my management will question our agreement." My heart sank. Had I lost my edge? Was my careful dance about to trip on a misstep of his making? It was clear that he held power in knowing the confines of his corporation, while I had insight into market trends that could be used to incentivize his decision-making. The realization of what was at stake surged through me. This was not just about negotiating a contract, but also about positioning myself as an ally rather than an adversary. Perhaps power doesn't always need to assert itself through demands or ultimatums. Sometimes it is wielded through understanding and alignment. In that critical moment, I decided to pivot. What if we explore a flexible term based on performance benchmarks? I suggested cautiously, leaning forward to emphasize my sincerity. We could tie the pricing to the success metrics of this project, allowing both sides to feel secure. It alleviates some pressure from you while still maintaining what your management requires. The proposal hung in the air, potent with possibility. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, a crack in the stony facade, an invitation to something more constructive. And that's when it clicked for me. The power to negotiate isn't rigid. It's a dance, one in which the steps must be learned, but the rhythm can be adapted to create harmony. Though I had felt outmatched initially, I learned that anyone can elevate their position by carefully peeling back the layers of influences present, embracing collaboration over confrontation with resilience. As I smiled at him, sensing the shift beneath us, I knew this was just the beginning. But like every great dance, there was still the thrilling uncertainty of how it would end. Using your power wisely. Power is a strange beast. It can build bridges or burn them. It can create opportunities or inhibit them. I learned this truth the hard way during my early years in the corporate world, navigating negotiations that came with weighty consequences. I remember sitting across the table from a seasoned negotiator, her eyes sharp and calculated, waiting for the first move. The stakes were high, and in that moment, I was acutely aware of the power dynamic at play. While I desperately wanted to secure a favorable deal, I had to remember the ethical implications of my influence. Looking back, I can pinpoint moments where leveraging my power felt justified, yet others where it teetered on manipulation. One such instance was when I advocated for a coworker who was overlooked for a promotion. I felt a surge of authority when I presented her case to upper management, emphasizing her contributions and potential. It was powerful to use my voice for someone else, transforming the negotiation into a win-win rather than a transaction focused solely on my gain. The respect it garnered among my peers felt immensely rewarding, reminding me that power doesn't always have to be self-serving. On the flip side, there was the time I negotiated a contract with a vendor who was clearly weary from my relentless bargaining. I pushed hard for terms that were advantageous for us, while neglecting the strain I was placing on their business. Sure, we landed a great deal, but as the celebratory email left my inbox, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that I had crossed an ethical line. It was a momentary triumph, tainted with guilt, and I learned that wielding power without consideration of the other side could lead to collateral damage. As I reflect on both experiences, I realize that true power lies not just in achieving goals, but in ensuring that the path you take honors the dignity of others. My encounters illuminated a valuable lesson. Being strategic with power means balancing assertiveness with respect. I've come to view negotiations less as battles to be won and more as conversations waiting to evolve. Each interaction is a chance to share our voices, our needs, and find common ground, fostering an environment of trust and collaboration. As I navigate the complexities of influence in my life, I strive to wield my power wisely, always affirming that every negotiation can lead to mutually beneficial outcomes when approached with integrity and empathy. However, the delicate balance of power often presents unforeseen challenges. Just when I thought I had mastered the art of ethical negotiation, an unexpected scenario pushed me to my limits. A colleague, with whom I've often clashed over competing interests, approached me with a last-minute proposition that could alter the trajectory of our project significantly. The urgency hung heavily in the air, heightened by the knowledge that our respective teams were on the brink of transformative innovations. I felt that familiar charge of power coursing through me again, the thrill of influence tinged with the weight of responsibility. With so much on the line, I found myself wrestling with the instinct to dominate the negotiation, to assert control. But could I take this moment for personal gain, or was there a greater opportunity for collaboration? The balance of power in negotiation. When I first entered the world of negotiations, I was like a child in a candy store, dazzled by the different flavors and colors, but completely unaware of the subtle dynamics at play. I remember a particular negotiation where power dynamics loomed over us like a thundercloud, darkening the atmosphere before the first words were even spoken. We were vying for a partnership with a well-established company, one whose clout within the industry was undeniable. Sitting across from their representatives, I felt the weight of their power, much heavier than our collective bargaining position. It was a stark realization that, despite our innovative ideas, we were coming to the table as the underdogs. The imbalance in power that day was palpable, and it drastically influenced our strategies and outcomes. Every hesitant pause from their side felt like a veiled threat. Every practiced smile, a reminder of the leverage they held. I had to remind myself that negotiation is not just about saying the right words. It's about understanding the forces at play. Forces that often have less to do with facts and figures than with perception and authority. The challenge was not just in convincing them of our worth, but in leveling the playing field so that our voice could be heard amidst the booming echoes of their influence. To navigate such challenging dynamics, I learned the value of preparation and adaptability. Missteps are inevitable, but if you can identify the sources of power and adapt your approach accordingly, you can shift the dialogue in your favor. We began by highlighting our unique offerings, positioning ourselves not just as competitors, but as partners who could elevate their brand. I introduced the concept of emotional intelligence, acknowledging their concerns while slowly introducing our potential solutions. Each conversation became an exercise in balancing respect with assertiveness, crafting responses that acknowledged their dominance but also affirmed our strengths. This approach reminded me that it's not always about equal power. Sometimes it's about equal influence. As we moved toward the conclusion of our discussions, I felt a change in the air. It was subtle, like a breeze shifting direction, but it was there. Our voices had begun to matter, and that was the turning point I had been seeking. As we approached the signing of the agreement, the tension escalated. I could sense their uncertainty. Would they truly align with a smaller company, or would they pull back and retreat to their safe, familiar partnerships? In those last pivotal moments, the balance of power was not just a game. It was a living entity, morphing and twisting with each new piece of information exchanged. Our strategy had worked, and with it, we carved out a new narrative, one where we'd found common ground, transformed a power struggle into a power-sharing paradigm. I could feel our partnership solidifying, each term of the agreement representing more than just ink on paper. It was an acknowledgement of our place in an industry that initially seemed poised to dismiss us. The gusting winds of negotiation had shifted, and as I left that conference room, I knew that the balance of power was, in fact, always negotiable. Chapter 10, Closing the Deal, Recognizing When to End. It was one of those crisp autumn afternoons when the air is filled with the scent of decaying leaves and ambition. I found myself seated across from three negotiators, each equipped with a variety of strategies and a steely resolve that could outlast the seasons. We were locked in what had become an endless give and take, a colossal tug of war over something that, quite frankly, began to feel trivial. The initial excitement of the negotiation had withered away, replaced by a tangible tension that made every passing minute ache like a dull headache. As the hours dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had departed from the original purpose. I recalled the wise words of my mentor, Paul, who often reminded me, not every negotiation merits your endurance. Some require your courage to walk away. It was advice I had taken to heart, yet here I was, second-guessing myself amidst the din of competing interests and obstinate demands. The red flags started popping up in my mind like layers of an onion, a negotiation that had shifted from collaborative to combative. Tactics were growing increasingly aggressive, sidestepping the spirit of cooperation that initially drove us together. Questions began to surface. Was I still advocating for my interests, or had I become too invested in this perpetual back and forth? At what point did pragmatism dissolve into stubbornness? Paul had a way of illuminating the nuanced texture of these scenarios. I often found inspiration in our brainstorming sessions, where he'd lay out examples from his own experiences. He once recounted a deal that had spiraled downward due to his unwillingness to recognize the endgame. The lesson from his tale echoed in my mind again and again. It's critical to identify when negotiations bleed both time and resources, yours and theirs. This brought me back to my current situation. My agenda had turned from mutual benefit to mere survival of the fit. I could sense the energy in the room shift, the flickering of uneasy glances, and the overly practiced smiles drifting into the territory of forced friendships. With each passing beat, it became clearer that we were no longer serving each other's interests. The question lingered in the air. When was it time to pull the plug? In a flash of insight, I remembered another lesson from Paul. Symptoms of a stalemate often reveal themselves through certain signs: excessive posturing, repeated arguments, and an unwillingness to compromise. As I weighed these indicators, my thoughts coalesced into a singular realization. This negotiation was no longer productive, and it was costing me more than I had anticipated. With my heart pounding in my chest, I instinctively glanced at the clock. The blur of time felt heavy. We had exhausted possibilities, danced in circles, and were now teetering between frustration and defeat. I knew I had to act. It was time to channel the courage Paul so adamantly preached. This didn't just require an exit strategy, but a respectful closure to a cycle we no longer needed to perpetuate. Gathering my thoughts, I took a deep breath that felt almost cleansing. I believe we've reached a point where further dialogue may not yield the results we hoped for, I ventured, my voice steady yet firm. Perhaps it's time we consider alternative paths. As those words hung heavy in the air, an unexpected mix of relief and tension broke the moment. In my heart, I knew I had made the right choice, but for a fleeting second, I found myself grappling with doubt. Could I really close this chapter when the stakes felt so high? As my words soaked into the silence, I realized this wasn't a failure. It was a crucial step towards clarity, both for me and for them. We were no longer stuck in a rut, but rather reclaiming our agency. I had walked that tightrope between persistence and surrender and ultimately chose to honor my own value and the valuable time we all had. The lesson was etched into my mind. Recognizing when to end is as much a part of negotiating as crafting the agreement itself. Using closing techniques. There's an art to closing that transforms an ordinary conversation into a pivotal moment. I still remember my first experience with the assumption close, a technique that seems simple but carries a weight of power when executed correctly. I was nervous, fresh into a new sales job, sitting across a polished wooden table from a client whose interest was as apparent as a flickering flame. I learned to speak confidently, that weaving my proposals into the fabric of our conversation. By asking, "When would you like to get started?" I wasn't waiting for permission. I was ushering them into a partnership. The smile on their face told me I had done more than just close a deal. I had opened a door to possibilities. Another memory that echoes in my mind is the urgency close, a technique that reminds us all of the clock ticking down. I had a particularly challenging client who relished the thought of dragging out negotiations. I used time constraints to my advantage, saying, "This offer is only valid until the end of the week." Suddenly, the weight of decision-making swung back in my favor. It wasn't about manipulation. It was about lighting a fire beneath complacency. The client, seemingly indifferent, suddenly found urgency in a decision that had been festering for weeks. By framing it as a limited opportunity, I transformed the conversation from a mere discussion into an urgent quest. What struck me most was the importance of listening when employing these techniques. With every negotiation, I learned it's not enough to just speak. It's about hearing the subtle cues that reveal a person's desires or fears. One afternoon, while grappling with yet another hesitant prospect, I employed the feel, felt, found technique. I acknowledged their concerns by saying, "I understand how you feel. When I first began this journey, I felt the same uncertainty." Other clients of mine found that by moving forward, they were able to tap into new resources and growth. The prospect relaxed. By relating my own experiences with theirs, I had built a bridge of trust. Their hesitation faded, and confidence surged as we began to talk about solutions instead of problems. So, what's the takeaway here? Each closing technique dances on the delicate line between persuasion and pressure, and it's crucial to remain on the right side. As I grew more experienced, I fleshed out my repertoire with techniques like the choice close, which provides options rather than ultimatums. Picture this. Instead of asking whether the client would like to proceed, I started presenting them with choices. Would you prefer the basic package or the premium one? This subtle shift in framing had a surprising effect. It empowered them and made them feel in control of their decision-making process. Reflecting back, each closing technique I've learned through the years crafted not only my skills but my perspective on communication. As I honed these techniques, I transformed pressure into trust and uncertainty into collaboration. Ultimately, it comes down to the message we convey. We're here together, navigating choices with respect for each other's unique journeys. And as each of these experiences builds upon another, I realize there's a culmination, a depth of understanding that tells me closing a conversation is just as crucial as beginning one. As my story unfolds, I can't help but feel that there's always more to learn and explore. Every closing interaction is a story within itself, a moment to step beyond mere sales pitches into genuine human connection. With every technique, I strive not to simply end a conversation, but to plant the seeds for future relationships, grounded in trust and shared success. And just like every story, as I continue to grow and adapt, I remain open to new chapters yet to be written. Finalizing agreements effectively. In the midst of negotiations, with data flying and emotions simmering, I remember the time I was closing a deal with a vendor that had the potential to double my business output. I had meticulously rehearsed every point and scrutinized every inch of the contract. Yet, as I sat across the conference table, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The stakes were high, but I realized that finalizing agreements effectively often means navigating through the haze of those final moments, where clarity can sometimes feel like it's hanging by a thread. Throughout this process, one golden rule stuck with me. Communication is everything. When I began asking open-ended questions, a wave of relief washed over the table. What were their concerns? What aspects of the agreement made them apprehensive? Those inquiries transformed the atmosphere from one of confrontation to collaboration. They weren't just there to sign on the dotted line, they wanted to feel heard and respected. It struck me then that a successful agreement doesn't just arise from the terms, but from the relationships built along the way. Every nod, every shared laugh helped to underpin our intentions. But of course, the reality of finalizing an agreement isn't devoid of tension. As I reviewed the last contract, a particular clause jumped out at me, a seemingly innocuous phrase that could be interpreted in several ways. My pulse quickened as I considered potential implications. What if this vague wording became a point of contention in the future? I felt a wave of determination surge within me. I called for a brief pause and suggested we all take a moment to clarify our understanding. What followed was a spirited discussion that illuminated our perspectives and concerns. It was then that I realized effective agreements must embrace clarity. Vagueness breeds conflict, while specificity fosters trust. As we approached the final moments of our negotiation, all parties felt empowered and ready to commit, but that wasn't the end of the story. I couldn't help but sense a lingering tension. Each of us poised, pens ready to sign, but with underlying hesitations. With a gentle but firm voice, I invited everyone back into the conversation. What does success look like for us? How will we know we've accomplished what we set out to do? It was as if a light bulb flickered on. Sharing a vision of success created a shared commitment. Suddenly, signing the agreement became more than just an act. It transformed into a pledge, a promise to each other to navigate hurdles together. In that final moment, as we signed, I realized that finalizing agreements is never just a transactional act. It is the culmination of trust, respect, and a shared vision. I left the room not only with an agreement in hand, but with a partnership established on mutual understanding and hope. So as we move forward into the realm of agreements and contracts, let us remember that every word matters, every emotion counts, and ultimately, it's the bonds we build that will echo beyond the ink on the page. Chapter 11. Learning from each experience. Reflecting on outcomes, success, and failure. I often find myself sitting on my porch, a hot cup of tea in hand, staring into the distance as the sun dips below the horizon. It's a moment of quiet reflection, a chance to sift through the tapestry of my life, woven with threads of triumphs and disappointments. Success and failure, two words that evoke such powerful emotions, binding us to our experiences, and shaping our identities in ways we might not always comprehend. The moment we begin to reflect on these outcomes is the moment we acknowledge the vast landscape of human experience beyond mere victories or defeats. Gathering feedback for improvement. Feedback has always been a double-edged sword for me. On one hand, it's the world's way of holding up a mirror, showing me where I shine and where I need polish. On the other, it can sometimes feel like a cold bucket of water when I'm just getting excited about my latest project. Think of it like a friend telling you that you have spinach in your teeth. Uncomfortable, perhaps, but absolutely essential if you're heading out for a big presentation. This blend of apprehension and eagerness has driven my journey of gathering feedback over the years. I remember when I first launched my online blog. Full of passion, I poured my heart into every article. Yet as weeks went by, I realized my audience didn't engage quite as I hoped. Was it my content, my writing style, or was it that I was unsure of whom I was speaking to? Those questions plagued my thoughts. One rainy afternoon, I decided to confront my fears and sent a survey to my readers, inviting them to share what they loved and what needed rethinking. Honestly, a part of me wished for glowing reviews, but I nervously anticipated the hard truths. Surprisingly, the feedback was constructive, revealing that I had veered too far into technical jargon without anchoring it in relatable stories. Inspired by this experience, I began to view feedback not as criticism, but as a pathway to growth. I established a routine of checking in with friends and peers before launching new pieces of work. I'd ask them to be candid, to critique me. The first time I did this, my heart raced as I waited for their responses. Their insights often lifted me, making me feel more human, while at other times it challenged my perspective in mind-opening ways. Not only did I gain valuable insights on my work, but I also connected more deeply with those around me, reminding me that it takes a village to truly create something meaningful. However, I must confess, there have been moments when feedback crushed my spirit, particularly during my first pitch for a book idea. The rejection was swift and clear. My premise didn't resonate. I went home, feeling deflated, but as I sat quietly in my living room, I reflected on the comments I'd received from the editor. Realizing there were golden nuggets mixed with the harsh truths, I took a deep breath and pinpointed key areas that required my attention. I rewrote the proposal with a fresh lens, tangled emotions aside, and sent it back out into the world. To my astonishment, what was once deemed unworthy was now met with enthusiasm. This roller coaster of experiences taught me that gathering feedback is not just a task, but a mindset. It's about fostering relationships, embracing vulnerability, and most importantly, learning to see your work through the eyes of others. I now seek out feedback from different arenas: friends, family, even strangers in online communities. Each perspective adds another layer to my understanding. However, amidst the warmth found in constructive suggestions, fear sometimes lurks. What if the next piece doesn't resonate? What if the feedback is overwhelmingly negative? As I dive deeper into my latest project, there's a part of me that's slightly apprehensive. I can almost hear the ticking clock, creating an atmosphere ripe with anticipation. Should I share it with my beta readers now, or wait until I feel it's perfect? I remind myself that nothing is ever truly perfect. It's the insights and pivots along the journey that shape the art. With a deep, resolute breath, I decide to embrace the discomfort of sharing early drafts again, knowing that the tension between excitement and anxiety is merely part of the creative process. In this ebb and flow of courage and fear, I gather not only feedback but also resilience, fortifying the road to improvement that lies ahead. Keeping a negotiation journal. It's funny how the simplest of ideas can have the profoundest impact. For years, I reveled in my chaotic approach to negotiations. I'd walk into a room armed with nothing more than my wits and a good smile. But there was something missing, something that nagged at me long after the deals were closed. It wasn't until a mentor nudged me toward keeping a negotiation journal that my perspective shifted. This simple act changed my approach dramatically, transforming intuition into strategy. In that first week of journaling, I discovered that each negotiation was not just a moment in time, but a tapestry woven from prior experiences, my successes, my stumbles, and those heart-stopping close calls. Each entry became my own little treasure trove of lessons learned and instincts honed. I began by jotting down the details: who was involved, the stakes at hand, and how I felt going into each conversation. These reflections became a mirror, reflecting not just my tactical play, but my emotional responses. As the pages filled, I noticed patterns emerging. Some players were consistent in their tactics, others took me by surprise each time. My own negotiation style became clearer. I realized that when I was anxious, I was prone to concessions. When I felt confident, I held my ground. The revelations were startling, but it was the entries marked with high-stakes tension that really shook me awake. I remember the session with a client who was more interested in intimidation than collaboration. I wrote down the energy in the room, the way my breath quickened, how I had drifted into a defensive posture. That day, I not only documented what happened, but I also dissected my emotional reactions. This wasn't just about sealing a deal, it was about understanding the battlefield of human interaction. Then came the breakthrough. I realized my journal was not just a record, it was a tool for future growth. I began drafting strategies for similar scenarios, refining my approach for next time. The journal became a rehearsal space, and slowly, I noticed changes in my negotiation style. My confidence climbed as I learned to navigate tension, anticipate resistance, and seize opportunities. I could almost hear the whispers of my previous self as I entered new negotiations, armed with fresh insights stored away just for these moments. But as I approached what felt like my biggest challenge yet, a multi-million-dollar contract with a notoriously difficult opponent, the stakes escalated. The day arrived, and I sat in the waiting area, my journal clenched in my lap. Recalling earlier entries gave me a sense of calm. yet the tension gripped my stomach like a vice. As I walked into the conference room, I took a second to breathe and glance at keynotes from my journal. Stay grounded, anticipate objections, listen actively. I approached the negotiation table knowing this wasn't just about the contract. It was a test of everything I had learned, and yet the air was thick with a sense of discord, the kind that could unravel even the best laid plans. What I hadn't counted on was the unpredictable nature of this opponent, someone who seemed to thrive in chaos, who wielded words like weapons. For every point I made, there was a counterstrike, a parry that left me reeling. My notes felt distant, like echoes of a strategy that was slowly unraveling under pressure. I could feel my adrenaline spike, invading my carefully crafted confidence. I struggled to remember my training, the lessons on poise and mindfulness. Then I recalled a critical entry regarding tactics in high-stakes negotiations. Just breathe and switch the focus back to collaboration. But as I eye the clock, time is slipping away, and so are my strategies. What came next was a whirlwind of instinct, grappling between fight or flight as I was faced with the ultimatum that could tip the scales. You see, keeping a negotiation journal isn't just about documenting your victories. It's about preparing for the unexpected, learning to evolve under pressure, and gleaning wisdom even from the most challenging encounters. Each word I had penned echoed in my mind, a reminder of what I was capable of, even when the ground beneath me felt uncertain. Will I make it through to the other side? Or has this negotiation masked more than just a simple contract waiting to be penned? As the seconds ticked, I felt the weight of possibility, palpable in the air, ready to ignite or implode. Chapter 12. Negotiation in Everyday Life. Negotiating at home, family, and relationships. Negotiation at home often feels like a high-stakes game played with beloved family members. When discussing everything from how to spend the weekend to choosing what's for dinner, it's a delicate balance of desires, preferences, and oftentimes emotional nuances. I've discovered that the key to successful negotiations at home lies not just in the words we choose, but also in the tone we set during these conversations. Over the years, I've found that approaching discussions as opportunities for collaboration rather than conflict can transform a heated negotiation into a meaningful dialogue. One memorable evening, I was hashing out holiday plans with my family. Each member had a different vision: a ski trip, a beach vacation, or simply staying home. The tension thickened like winter air as preferences clashed. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that we were all aiming for the same outcome: quality time together. That's when it hit me. I needed to steer the conversation to focus on our shared goals instead of our differing opinions. Once I shifted my approach, I invited each family member to express their thoughts without interruption. To my surprise, this opened the floodgates of ideas. We discussed the importance of making memories rather than where to make them. This realization changed the tone of our conversation. It became less about the where and more about the who we wanted to be with during those cherished moments. By helping my family connect emotionally to the negotiation, I was able to subtly guide us toward a holiday plan that incorporated elements from everyone's dream. However, my heart raced as we reached a decision. What if I'd missed someone's true feeling lurking beneath the surface? What if someone was just going along for the ride? As excitement built around a compromise, I remembered the importance of ongoing dialogue. Sure, we had decided to go for a ski trip because it was the majority's choice, but was everyone genuinely on board? It's essential to check in with family members after reaching an agreement. I learned this lesson the hard way one winter night. A couple of weeks after we decided on the ski trip, my younger brother, usually quiet, expressed his frustration at not being heard. He longed for a beach getaway to unwind from his stress-laden academic life. I hadn't identified that he'd felt the pressure of conformity and hadn't genuinely bought into the plan he went along with. The moment was a humbling reminder that sometimes during negotiations, the loudest voices can drown out the most important ones if we aren't vigilant. It was then I realized that negotiation at home doesn't end at reaching a consensus. It's an ongoing conversation. It requires consistent check-ins and adjustments as family dynamics evolve. This journey of negotiation within our family is nothing short of a work in progress. Each time we gather around the dinner table or engage in discussions about upcoming plans, I remind myself and my loved ones that we must nurture this space of collective communication. It's about more than reaching a decision, it's about weaving a tapestry of understanding, respect, and adaptability. As we anticipate the winter break, I can feel that familiar flutter of anxiety. Will we all get what we truly want, or will our voices clash once again? I'm ready for an open dialogue. After all, negotiating with love has become my mantra. Workplace negotiations, salary and roles. As I sat in the conference room, the scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the tension that hummed between me and my manager. I could feel my palms growing slick with perspiration, and I fought the urge to wipe them on my slacks. This was it, my opportunity to discuss not just my salary, but also my role within the company. I had rehearsed my talking points over and over in my head, but the stakes always seemed higher when the moment finally arrived. My thoughts drifted back to the countless hours I had spent preparing for this meeting. I sat down with a notepad filled with industry benchmarks and salary ranges, armed with the confidence that came from knowing my value. But still, a tiny voice inside me whispered doubts. What if I ask for too much? What if they don't see the worth in my contributions? I had tucked away those worries, but as I faced my manager, they surged back like the tide. I silently reminded myself that successful negotiations were rooted in clarity and confidence. I really appreciate the opportunity to meet today, I began, forcing a smile as I glanced at the stack of performance reports on the table. I've taken some time to reflect on my role and the contributions I've made over the last year. With each word, I felt the power of my narrative unfolding, and it propelled me forward. I detailed my achievements, the projects I had spearheaded, and the positive feedback I had received from clients and coworkers alike. As I spoke, I could see my manager's expression shift, and I hoped I might be reaching her. I believe my current salary does not reflect the value I've brought to the team, and I'd like to discuss a potential adjustment. Her response was not what I anticipated. You've done well, but we are working with a tight budget this quarter. The warmth in her voice was comforting, but I could feel the slight chill in her words. It was a classic corporate answer, a most common barrier in negotiations. My heart raced as I tried to hold my ground. I had read about techniques for overcoming objections. It was time to use them. I leaned in closer and asked, "What would it take for you to consider a salary increase?" This question was my gamble, a bold move designed to peel back layers of hesitation. I recognized it wasn't merely about the numbers, it was about understanding where we both stood. As she prepared to respond, I could sense the atmosphere shift once again, tension palpable as we hovered on the edge of a crucial decision. Moments like these felt like a dance, each step revealing the rhythm of our conversation, the push and pull of needs and negotiations. Suddenly, her phone buzzed on the table, an unwelcome interruption that hung in the air like an unresolved chord. I realized then that time was slipping through my fingers like sand, and I needed to make this count. With a deep breath, I pressed on, sharing my vision for my role moving forward. I am eager to take on more responsibility and lead new projects. I believe I could significantly impact our bottom line and client retention if I had the necessary support. My conviction echoed against the walls, but my heart was still racing. I was walking a tightrope between ambition and anxiety. I knew she had valid concerns about budget, but I was determined not to let fear drown out my aspirations. The room felt smaller as we began to dissect what value truly meant. My manager brought up reports of other team members and their roles. I listened, noting the details and trends she emphasized. It was a strategic pushback I hadn't seen coming, a reminder of the hierarchy, but also an opportunity. As I nodded in acknowledgement, an idea sparked in my mind. Perhaps I could turn this debate into a collaborative approach. What if we explored the possibility of a performance-based bonus? I offered, my voice steady despite the inner turmoil. That way, my increase would align directly with the company's performance and growth. A glimmer of surprise crossed her face, and I felt an adrenaline rush. As we continued to discuss this unexpected turn, I noticed a shift in dynamics. Suddenly, we weren't just two people across a table. We were collaborators seeking a solution neither of us had quite envisioned at the start. And just when I thought we'd reached an understanding, she paused. "Can you give me a moment?" She asked as she slid back her chair, and I was left in the echo of our previous conversation. I stared at the door, anxiety tightening its grip on my chest. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely just a few minutes, I refocused. I revisited my notes, reassured myself of my worth, and prepared for the yet unknown path ahead. My heart pounded against the backdrop of silence, and I mentally prepared for what was to come. Would she return with an offer, or would the conversation drift towards a dead end? The tension pulled taut, and I knew one thing: whatever happened next was crucial. A turning point in not just my career, but in how I viewed my own worth in the workplace. Community engagement and advocacy. When I first moved to this quiet little town, I could hardly have imagined the profound impact community engagement would have on my life. It was a chilly afternoon, and I was rummaging through a box in my new attic when I found what seemed to be an old neighborhood newsletter. The pictures captured smiling faces and community events that helped knit together the fabric of our small town. And as I flipped through the brittle pages, a spark ignited within me. I yearned to be part of something bigger than myself. I began to realize that advocacy wasn't just a word I'd skimmed over in textbooks. It was a raw, energetic force I could wield to make a change. As I became more involved, the stories came alive. I attended town hall meetings and found myself surrounded by residents bubbling with passion and ideas. I remember one meeting particularly well, where a frail elderly woman stood up to voice her concerns about the deteriorating state of our local park. Her voice trembled, but the weight of her words was undeniable. She spoke of childhood memories made on those swings, of laughter and sunlight, and I felt the urgency in her plea. It hit me then. Community engagement is about more than just voicing concerns. It is about weaving our lives into a shared narrative that respects, honors, and understands each other's experiences. Armed with the conviction that we could turn that park around, I gathered a group of neighbors for a weekend cleanup. It was exhilarating to see people from diverse backgrounds come together, wielding trash bags and brooms. We laughed as we picked up litter and pulled weeds, but as the sun set that day, the significance of our actions was deeper than I initially realized. Each piece of trash we collected felt like a testimony to our commitment. Together, we were not just cleaning a park, but fostering a sense of ownership in our community. Weeks passed, and our small initiative grew. People heard about our efforts, and soon, local businesses jumped in to offer donations and resources. We organized a neighborhood picnic, which did more than celebrate our achievements. It painted a picture of collaboration. Yet as I stood in the center of it all, feeling accomplished, I sensed a storm brewing in the background. A new housing development was proposed on the edge of town, and whispers circulated that it would encroach on our beloved park. Suddenly, everything we had worked for was put at risk. The sense of urgency I had felt before intensified. I knew I couldn't stand idly by, so I started rallying the community again, this time with a fire ignited beneath us. I created a petition, inviting everyone to voice their opposition. I shared the story of that elderly woman who inspired our cleanup and spoke about what the park meant to each of us. With every signature we gathered, I felt our collective spirit grow stronger. Then came the day of the town board presentation. The tension in the room was palpable as developers flaunted glossy brochures, painting pictures of a community utopia that would arrive with their project. But when it was our turn, I took a deep breath and stepped forward, heart racing. I recounted our journey, the cleanup, the picnic, the bonds we'd formed, and I could see the flicker of recognition in the eyes of the board members. I shared how much our park meant not just to us, but also to the identity of the town. As we approached the conclusion of our presentation, it hit me like a wave crashing ashore. The urgency was more than a fight for a park. It was about what kind of community we wanted to be, how we defined ourselves in the face of change. With the room still hanging on my words, I closed with a call to action. Let's not just be residents, let's be stewards of this community. But even as the applause echoed in the chamber, doubt began to creep in. Was our passion enough? Would the board truly hear our voices amidst the clamor for development? Even in that moment of triumph, uncertainty loomed heavily, teasing what the future might hold. I left that meeting with more questions than answers, a feeling that the battle for our community had only just begun. And as I stepped outside, the shadows of the evening creeping in, I realized that engaging a community is just the first chapter of a much larger story. It's in the advocacy that our true test lies ahead. Chapter 13: Expanding Your Negotiation Skills. Continuous Learning and Development. It was a Tuesday morning when I felt that familiar itch, the one that always urged me to dive deeper into learning. I sipped my coffee, glancing through a pile of books stacked haphazardly on my desk, each promising a new insight into a world that seemed just out of reach. I had always believed that learning was a lifelong journey, not a destination. Yet, it wasn't until I found myself in a stagnant job that I truly realized how vital continuous learning and development were to my personal and professional evolution. My job had become a monotonous cycle of tasks that didn't challenge me. I realized I was on autopilot, not quite coasting through life, but definitely avoiding the bumps in the road that could propel me forward. That's when I decided to shake things up. I enrolled in an online course about digital marketing tactics. I'll admit, my heart raced with fear as I clicked enroll. Could I really juggle my job, my family responsibilities, and this new commitment? The voice of self-doubt whispered incessantly, but I muted it with the hope of what I could learn. The first session was a whirlwind. I found myself immersed in strategies that transformed not only my understanding of marketing, but also inspired my decision-making process. I can still remember the thrill I felt as I implemented my first social media campaign at work, taking the reins on a project I would have previously left to my coworkers. That single decision, taking on a challenge fueled by newfound knowledge, didn't just boost my confidence, it sparked opportunities I had never imagined. I could feel a shift in my work environment, a wave of creativity washing over me. I was learning, developing, growing, and suddenly, everything felt refreshing again. But I learned that the path of continuous learning isn't all sunshine and rainbows. As I dove deeper into this new chapter of my life, I encountered setbacks. There were days when the online platforms would crash, disrupting my tightly packed schedule. On others, I'd receive feedback that made me question my capabilities. I remember one particularly grueling project where my presentation flopped. Instead of hiding, I sought feedback with an open heart and mind. It was a tough pill to swallow, but essential. Each critique propelled me further along the learning curve. As I adapted, I began to see learning not as an isolated venture, but as a communal journey. I connected with others who shared similar goals. We became a tribe of sorts, sharing resources, tips, and most importantly, support. There was something profoundly reassuring about standing atop each other's shoulders, leveraging our diverse experiences and knowledge bases. Each new insight became a tool in my toolkit, equipping me to take on challenges I once thought insurmountable. The real magic happened when I completed that course, adorned with a digital badge that now marked a milestone in my journey. The thrill of learning had transformed into an unwavering commitment. I had entered a cycle of continuous education that started to spread its wings beyond just marketing. It reached into areas I had never considered: leadership, finance, and even mental well-being. It was exhilarating, this ongoing development that seemed to touch every aspect of my life. Just when I thought I had everything figured out, the universe intervened with another curveball. My company faced sudden restructuring, and I found myself staring down the barrel of uncertainty. Would I still have a job? As my heart raced, I realized that every lesson learned, every skill acquired, had reinforced a crucial truth. I could adapt. The world was not going to stop moving for me. It was time to pivot once again, to embrace uncertainty and lean into this state of learning. This tumultuous journey taught me an irrefutable lesson. Stagnant waters never yield anything new. The fear of failure and the unease of not knowing were important steps toward growth. As I stood on the precipice of another transformation, I felt an exhilarating rush, for I had learned how to learn. So here I was, ready to dive again and carve my way through the chaos, continuously learning and evolving. embracing every lesson as an opportunity. Joining networks and communities. It was a rainy afternoon when I decided to take the plunge. I had always been the type to shy away from social gatherings, suffocating in the corners of rooms filled with strangers. Yet, here I was, staring at my computer screen with an enormous sense of apprehension and excitement bubbling in my chest. After endless nights of reading articles about the importance of networking, I knew I had to step out of my comfort zone. Joining networks and communities could be the gateway to opportunities I had only dreamed of. I opened my laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard, as I searched for local groups aligned with my interests. Finding the right community took a bit of digging. I stumbled onto Meetup, and soon I was scrolling through a multitude of groups, from writers, workshops to tech meetups, and beyond. Each title seemed to echo promises of inspiration and connection. It reminded me of my childhood, when I would collect stickers from various clubs, each one representing a piece of my identity. After much deliberation, I clicked join on a book club, feeling a rush of adrenaline at having made my first move. Little did I know, this moment was just the beginning of an adventure filled with unexpected surprises and almost comical missteps. On the day of the first meeting, the jitters returned with a vengeance. I almost canceled, drowning in a sea of self-doubt. But in a moment of clarity, I remembered my desire for connection, and I forced myself to step out of that familiar bubble of isolation. Walking into the cafe where the group was meeting, I felt like an actor stepping onto a stage, unsure of the script. The warm buzz of conversations surrounded me, a cacophony of voices that seemed to merge into a melodic hum. As I clutched my coffee cup, my shield, I scanned the room and caught their eyes, a few familiar faces of strangers, and yet an undeniable connection brewed in the air. Throughout that first gathering, I desperately sought out opportunities to contribute. I stumbled over my words when asked about my favorite book, mixing up titles and authors as if I were trying to juggle water balloons. Still, those awkward moments broke the ice, earning me genuine laughter and nods of understanding. The setting felt more like a gathering of friends than mere acquaintances. I left that night not just with a renewed passion for reading, but with an invitation to join a writing workshop the following week, an opportunity I couldn't have fathomed just days before. As the weeks rolled on, I committed myself fully to these networks, and they began to reshape who I was becoming. Each meeting brought collective wisdom and varied experiences that enriched my understanding of not just literature, but of life, as we shared stories woven with grief and joy alike. Yet, amidst the warmth and camaraderie, I realized tensions would often bubble up beneath the surface. Disagreements over literary interpretations or clashes of personality would arise, but instead of driving us apart, these moments forged deeper connections. It was in the discussions that challenged my views where I found the most growth. Then came the invite to present my writing at a local literary festival. Excitement shot through my veins, yet my heart pounded with fear. I wanted to say yes, but doubt crept in like a shadow. What if I stumbled over my words again? What if they didn't like my writing? The whisper of insecurity grew louder, yet the thought of not seizing this opportunity began to gnaw at my spirit. Could I brave the stage and represent not just myself, but the community that had nurtured me? In that moment, I realized this was more than a chance to showcase my work. It was an invitation to step into the light and prove to myself that growth often lies on the other side of fear. And so it was, on the night of the festival, as I stood backstage, heart racing and palms sweaty, that I understood what these networks truly offered me. They created a space not just for learning, but for pushing boundaries and embracing vulnerability. The spotlight felt scorching, but it was also illuminating. No matter how it went, I had already won. I was part of something larger than myself. The moment is a culmination of sweat and laughter, tension and release. A beautiful, messy reminder that finding your community is only the first step. What truly matters is how deeply you allow yourself to engage, to nurture, and to inspire one another amidst the ever-evolving tapestry of relationships. Practicing with simulation exercises. It was a chilly autumn morning, the kind that makes you want to crawl back into bed, but I had bigger plans. My excitement felt like a kid on Christmas morning, ready to unwrap what I hoped would be transformative training. I had read about simulation exercises in various self improvement books, and today was my chance to finally dive in. The buzz in the air was palpable as I arrived at the training center, my heart racing with anticipation. The first simulation was designed to mimic a high pressure work environment. As I took my seat, I felt a swell of apprehension. What if I fumbled? What if I didn't perform as well as I envisioned? Despite my nerves, it struck me almost immediately how these exercises could mirror real world challenges. We were grouped into teams, and suddenly we were tasked to brainstorm solutions to a fictional company crisis. The lights dimmed, and the facilitator's voice boomed through the room, presenting us with unexpected twists that tested our collaboration and decision making skills. As we dove into the simulation, I felt the familiar mixture of adrenaline and camaraderie. I recalled a time when my own team had faced minimal communication issues during a pivotal project. Would we fall into the same traps here? But as we began brainstorming, I realized I had the power to change that. I encouraged open dialogue, reminding my teammates that every idea was valuable, fostering an environment where creativity thrived. The intensity increased, and time was slipping away. But with every challenge presented, I felt more empowered. The world outside faded, and in those moments, we were not just practicing, we were living the experience. Yet, just as I felt we were hitting a stride, a game-changing scenario was introduced. Our fictional market collapsed, and the stakes had never been higher. We were forced to make quick decisions about resources and budget cuts. A wave of panic washed over the room as we scrambled to strategize. I watched my teammates become frantic, fear etched on their faces. It was a stark reminder of how easily pressure could derail even the best laid plans. At that moment, I knew we had to remember the principles we had practiced. I gathered them, urging focus, and we rallied together, navigating through the chaos, inspired by a sense of shared purpose. By the end of the exercise, despite the sweat on our brows and the weight of mounting tension, we emerged as a team. Not just collaborators, but comrades who had each shown resolve under fire. Yet as we reflected, there was an underlying sense of urgency that lingered, an unspoken acknowledgement of the unpredictability of real-life situations. How would we respond if this were not a simulation but genuine adversity? And thus, as we wrapped up, I realized that simulation exercises weren't merely practice. They were vital preparations for the unpredictability of life. They taught us not just the how, but also the why, for it is in our responses to crisis that our true character is revealed. Chapter 14: Ethics in Negotiation. Understanding ethical boundaries. There's a moment in everyone's life when we come face to face with a choice that feels monumental, like a fork in the road where one path leads to comfort and convenience, while the other stretches into the murky terrain of ethics. I remember standing in my college ethics class, surrounded by my peers, each of us armed with our own moral compass. The professor posed a question that rattled the very core of our beliefs. Is it ever acceptable to break a promise for the greater good? My heart raced as I realized these weren't just theoretical dilemmas. They were real-life scenarios that shaped who we are and who we choose to become. Life has a funny way of testing our ethical boundaries. For instance, I had a close friend who found themselves in a tough spot at work. They were asked to omit crucial information in a report that would impact stakeholders considerably. The decision was mundane in the eyes of the employer, just another day in corporate life. But for my friend, it felt like a tipping point. We spoke at length, exploring the ramifications of honesty versus loyalty. I urged them to adhere to their principles, emphasizing that once we begin to compromise our ethics, the boundaries blur, and it becomes easier to make similar decisions in the future. After much deliberation, my friend chose transparency. The impact was immediate. While the tides turned against them at that moment, a flood of respect and trust followed. They were approached by colleagues who admired their bravery, and the wheels of change began to turn within the company. This brings me to a crucial realization. Understanding ethical boundaries is not just about checking boxes or following rules. It's about constructing a framework for decision-making that aligns with our values, even when the stakes are high. The landscape of ethics, much like the shifting perspectives in my friend's story, is anything but static. It evolves as we gather experiences and insights. I recall attending a workshop where the facilitator discussed corporate social responsibility. He shared stories of businesses that took the brave step of prioritizing ethics over profit. We learned that ethical practices not only foster goodwill among customers, but also provide long term sustainability. Here lies the paradox. The more we embrace ethical boundaries, the more they expand, enriching our personal and professional lives. Yet, there's an unsettling truth lurking behind these heartwarming anecdotes. As I ventured deeper into the nuances of ethics in my own life, the boundaries began to feel more tenuous. One evening, I found myself facing a dilemma involving a promising business partnership that was rife with potential but shadowed by rumors of questionable practices. My instincts screamed at me to pull back, yet the lure of success whispered enticingly in my ear. Was it time to compromise my ethical standards for an inviting opportunity? I squirmed at the thought, reminding myself that integrity is a currency worth preserving. In navigating this complex web, I've learned that ethical boundaries serve not just as barriers, but as filters through which we can assess our decisions. It's not merely about right versus wrong, it's about aligning our choices with our true selves. As I stand at these metaphorical crossroads, I remind myself of a simple mantra: be the person your younger self would be proud of. In that moment of self reflection, amidst all the noise of external pressures, I'm reminded of the power of ethical clarity. But the tension is palpable, isn't it? The desire to succeed often goes hand in hand with the temptation to play it safe, yet every time we yield to that temptation, we chip away at our character. I invite you, dear reader, to examine the ethical boundaries in your own life. Are they fortified by principles you hold dear, or are they fraying in the face of external pressures? Perhaps it's time to reflect, to engage in those uncomfortable conversations we tend to dodge. Because when the stakes are highest, when we're tempted to step over the line just this once, that's when our true selves emerge. As I continue the journey of understanding, I realize one truth stands firm. Ethics is not about perfection. It's about commitment to our values when it matters the most. The impact of integrity on relationships. It was a chilly Wednesday evening when I first realized how pivotal integrity is in building relationships. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, my longtime friend. We were planning a weekend getaway, but as usual, she found a way to stir some drama. Pivoting to another destination might be better, she texted, citing an obscure travel guide that promised unexplored beaches. While I was excited about a getaway with her, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. After years of friendship, I had learned that Sarah often veered into half-truths, and this caused ripples in our bond. I decided to be honest. Sarah, last time you suggested a sudden change, it led us to that dingy motel with the leaky roof. Let's stick to our original plan. I braced myself for her reply. At that moment, I wondered if being straightforward was the right approach. It felt daunting, but the past experiences dictated that integrity was crucial in our friendship. And to my surprise, she replied with an unexpected warmth, acknowledging my concern. You're right. I just get excited and forget about past mishaps. We reached a consensus to keep our original plans, and our relationship leaped over another hurdle. This moment, though relatively mundane, captured for me the essence of integrity in relationships. Integrity, after all, isn't just about lofty morals. It's the glue that binds people together, fostering trust and understanding. Like the steady flame on a candle, it illuminates the darkness of uncertainty and doubt in human connections. I have always believed that when you articulate your truth, even if it leads to discomfort, it nurtures an atmosphere of trust, an unshakable foundation. As I analyzed Sarah's response deeper, I saw how my commitment to honesty didn't just lift some of the weight off my chest, but also empowered her to own her flaws. Consequently, every time we engaged in some form of discord, it turned into an opportunity to be real, crafting a relationship that was permeated with authenticity. Fast forward a few months, and I found myself in a different situation with my boss at work, Laura. There was a new project that everyone was clamoring for, and I noticed my colleagues slinging negative comments about each other. It seemed the stakes were high, and instead of stepping up in the midst of this swirling conflict, they resorted to misinformation. I had to decide whether I would participate in the drama or be the rare voice of reason. I approached Laura and, with conviction, shared my observations of the unnecessary tension among our team. I could see her shoulders relax as I sought to address the issue head on. It reminded me of something I had often heard: integrity in the workplace isn't just noble, it's transformational. As a leader, she appreciated my honesty, which strengthened the dynamics of our working relationship. Our candor left space for team meetings filled with constructive feedback rather than resentment. In both scenarios, I realized that integrity, indeed, can be challenging. It pushes you to confront emotions that often simmer beneath the surface. However, the results are almost always positive, weaving a fabric of reliability that nurtures personal and professional relationships alike. Not everyone is adept at embracing integrity, as it requires one to sit in the uncomfortable seat of vulnerability. But when you do, a miraculous change occurs. You encourage those around to be transparent and genuine, creating an environment wherein relationships flourish, even in moments of tension. They know that honesty is valued, and suddenly, a sense of loyalty begins to bloom. Yet, the question remains: how does one maintain this unwavering commitment to integrity when life throws curveballs our way? As I pondered this, I found myself facing uncertainty again. Just as Laura and I built a formidable connection through honesty, I was on the brink of an unsettling situation with my family. It felt chaotic leading into the holidays. Cracks were beginning to show that had been hidden for years under the guise of niceties. The culprit was an unspoken meal tradition that had been broken during a recent family gathering, leading to misunderstandings and grievances being aired with a fervor I had never witnessed before. With all this drama bubbling beneath the surface, I had a choice to make. Would I choose peacekeeping, glossing over the issues, or would I confront the elephant in the room with my family? In that moment, I could not help but reflect on the power of integrity. It had enabled me to navigate both friendships and professional realms creatively and constructively. Now, it would come to a test that was perhaps even more daunting. Could I apply what I knew to be true, despite the emotional wall I felt rising? Would the integrity I tried to cultivate be enough to mend the fragile threads that wove my family together? I scheduled an evening with my relatives, a risky endeavor, as honesty can sometimes lead to a chaos you did not sign up for. But I hoped that by risking authenticity, I could reinforce our relationships, creating empathy and understanding where it was lacking. Little did I know, as the warmth of the holidays crept closer, tensions would rise, and amidst our festive cheer, a storm threatened to erupt. This time, I would need a full measure of integrity to navigate the complexity of familial connections that demanded respect, while recognizing that unearthing buried issues is often the first step toward healing. How I approached this upcoming gathering could either fortify our ties or unravel them entirely. Would my commitment to integrity hold strong, leading us back to a place of love and connection? Balancing strategy with morality. It was a crisp autumn day when I found myself sitting across the table from Marcus, the CEO of a fast-growing tech startup. The sun streamed through the cafe window, illuminating the contours of his worried face as he delved into a dilemma that had kept him awake for nights on end. Do I choose the path that ensures profit or the path that reflects my values? He asked, his voice quivering slightly. In that moment, I realized how relatable this fundamental struggle was, not just for him, but for all of us navigating life's murky waters of choices. As I sipped my coffee, the warmth spreading through me offered some comfort. I reflected on my own experiences, the numerous instances where my decisions collided with my ethical beliefs. There was the time I had to decide whether to push a product that I knew wasn't fully ready for the market. It was a strategic choice, one that could have boosted our financial outlook in the short term, but it gnawed at my conscience. I recalled the faces of my team, the ones who trusted me to lead with integrity. I had to ask myself, was it worth compromising my morals for a spike in profit? The answer, as I discovered, often came down to a delicate balance. Marcus leaned in closer, as if sharing an unspoken secret. But what if I lose out to competitors who don't hesitate to bend the rules? His fear was palpable, a familiar specter that loomed over many business leaders and personal decision-makers alike. I took a deep breath, remembering a quote from a mentor. In the grand tapestry of life, the threads of strategy are often interwoven with those of moral fibers. Strategy and morality may seem like polar opposites, but in truth, they can create a balanced harmony if approached with intention and awareness. That day in the cafe, I recounted the story of a successful entrepreneur who faced a similar crossroads. He had to decide whether to save costs by outsourcing underwhelming labor overseas, potentially sacrificing quality and ethics for immediate gains. He chose instead to invest in local talent, knowing it would take longer to see returns. It wasn't just about the money, it was a statement of his values that resonated throughout his company culture. Over time, that choice created a fiercely loyal customer base and a workforce proud of their work, illustrating how sticking to one's moral compass can often lead to unexpected victories. Marcus nodded, but doubt still flickered in his eyes. I understood that skepticism. I had wrestled with it myself. As we talked more, I shared practical ideas, ways he could implement a strategy that didn't shy away from his morals. It came down to a guiding principle, aligning business objectives with his core values. We devised a plan that included transparent communication with his stakeholders about their commitment to ethical practices while also achieving financial sustainability. It was a dance of compromise, where the music of morality was never entirely drowned out by the beat of profit. But as our conversation deepened, a shadow crept into the room. The looming deadline of an investor meeting, the pressure to deliver results. Suddenly, the cafe felt smaller, the air thick with tension. What if he made a choice that betrayed his ethical stance? What if the fear of failure overshadowed the moral compass he held dear? I could see his internal battle waging, a powerful reminder that these moments of pressure often reveal our true selves. As we wrapped up our discussion, I left Marcus with a parting thought: the importance of transparency. He needed to communicate clearly not just what his strategic goals were, but also how they aligned with the values he espoused. It was an invitation not just to lead with conviction, but to inspire others. I could see a flicker of determination igniting within him, a resolve to find that balance even in the chaos of competition. As I walked away, I felt a sense of elation mixing with anxiety. The world has enough leaders who prioritize strategy over morality. Yet, the real challenge is finding that sweet spot where both can coexist. Marcus's journey was just beginning, a reminder that the choices we make are not just reflections of our intelligence, but echoes of our values. Ultimately, it is this very complexity that weaves the rich fabric of our lives. Chapter 15: The Future of Negotiation. Emerging Trends in Negotiation Techniques. I remember the first time I walked into a negotiation room. My palms were sweaty, my heart raced, and I could feel the weight of every eye on me. It was a pivotal moment in my career, and I had prepared extensively, or so I thought. But nothing could have prepared me for the unexpected turn of events, where one simple question led to an impasse that I struggled to navigate. Fast forward to today, and I find myself reflecting on how much has changed in the world of negotiation. A landscape shaped by rapid advancements in technology and shifting societal values. The emergence of technology has fundamentally altered the way we negotiate. Remember the days of face-to-face meetings? Now we have video calls, chats, and collaborative online platforms that allow us to connect with anyone, anywhere in the world. This shift has not only changed logistics, but also the dynamics of power in negotiations. In the past, physical presence could dictate authority, but now, expertise and communication skills reign supreme, regardless of location. The intimacy of a negotiation has transformed. It can be just as compelling to negotiate over a screen as across a polished boardroom table. I recall a recent deal I negotiated entirely through a messaging app, and the back-and-forth dialogue gave us a sense of urgency, almost as if we were in a heated debate, despite being miles apart. Yet, even amidst the myriad of screens and tools, something more profound is happening. There is a growing awareness of the importance of emotional intelligence in negotiations. Techniques like active listening and empathy are no longer just buzzwords. They are essential strategies. I learned this the hard way during a contentious negotiation where I was so focused on my agenda that I completely overlooked the needs of the other party. The moment I paused to listen, to really listen, I discovered shared interests that pivoted the entire conversation towards a win win outcome. It's this awareness that creates a collaborative energy, a dance of give and take that can often lead to unexpected resolutions. The rise of conscious capitalism has also contributed to reshaping our negotiation strategies. Today, companies and individuals are not just concerned with closing a deal. They want to ensure that their agreements align with their values and contribute positively to society. This trend has encouraged negotiators to present proposals framed in the context of shared benefits. Personally, I've found that when I appeal to the greater good, my counterparts respond with an openness that would otherwise be elusive. It's almost magical to witness how common ground emerges when we focus on mutual benefits rather than competition. However, as I embrace these new trends, I can't help but feel a tinge of anxiety about the future. With the rapid evolution of artificial intelligence and its application in negotiation tactics, how will authenticity hold its ground? Will we find ourselves unraveling intricate algorithms instead of forging genuine human connections? The tension builds as I realize just how crucial it is for us to adapt while maintaining our core principles. How do we reconcile the progress in technology with the need for human touch? I'm left grappling with these questions, wondering if we can balance efficiency with empathy. And as I meet my next negotiation head on, I can almost hear the clock ticking, driving me to find that balance before it's too late. The role of AI and technology. As I sit here typing away, the soft hum of my laptop and the faint glow of the screen envelop me like a warm blanket. It's fascinating how much technology has transformed our lives in what seems like the blink of an eye. I remember when I was a kid and my family got our first home computer. It was a clunky thing, the kind that took an eternity to boot up, but it opened up a world of possibilities. Panic and excitement fused together as I learned about how to type, play games, and even tap into this wonder called the internet. Fast forward to today, where artificial intelligence and advanced technology are reshaping reality itself. I often muse on how AI is intricately woven into the fabric of our daily existence. It crafts our playlists, recommends movies, and even suggests the best routes to avoid traffic. Isn't it strange to think that a mere algorithm is guiding so many of our decisions? Yet beyond these conveniences lies a deeper narrative, one that raises pressing questions about dependence, ethics, and the sheer power of these digital companions. For instance, I recently experimented with an AI tool that generates art based on simple prompts. My heart raced as the digital canvas filled with vibrant colors and intricate designs. In one moment, I was mesmerized by the beauty. In the next, I felt a twinge of unease, confronting the fear that our creativity might become secondary to machines that can replicate it. But the role of technology is not merely as a substitute for human ingenuity. It can also be a catalyst for it. I can think of countless stories where innovation led to groundbreaking solutions, from clean energy advancements to medical AI that aids in diagnosing illnesses faster than any human could hope to achieve. A close friend of mine, an aspiring doctor, shared her experience with AI diagnostics in her rotations. She was initially skeptical, feeling threatened by the notion that a machine might outperform her. However, as she witnessed patients receive faster, more accurate diagnoses, her hesitation crumbled into profound appreciation. It opened her eyes to the collaboration between human skill and artificial intelligence, a union that fosters creativity and ultimately leads to improving lives. Yet, our journey into this brave new world comes with its own set of challenges. We often hear discussions about the potential for job displacement and the ethical dilemmas that accompany autonomous systems. The recent headlines about AI generating deepfake videos or bias in algorithms illustrate the growing need for responsible innovation. I attended a recent tech conference where I listened to a panel debate on these issues. One speaker passionately argued that though technology has immense potential to enlighten and empower, it also places a monumental responsibility on us to ensure that it serves humanity's best interests. I left the auditorium that day charged with the urgency to not just be passive consumers of technology, but active participants in shaping its development. The lines between opportunity and risk are thinner than ever, And as we move forward, the stakes are undeniably high. Do we have the courage and the foresight to navigate the exhilarating possibilities that come with AI and technology? As I contemplate this question, I find myself standing at a crossroads. Just when I believed I had a grasp on the narrative, everything shifted like sand beneath my feet. A new AI breakthrough was announced late one evening, triggering a frenzied debate online and raising concerns over privacy breaches and ethical dilemmas. Could this latest innovation tip the scale towards chaos instead of enlightenment? I couldn't help but feel a ripple of concern creeping up my spine, compelling me to dive deeper and explore what this means for all of us. Preparing for tomorrow's challenges. As I sit here, staring out the window at the world bathed in the soft glow of an autumn sunset, it strikes me how quickly life can change. Just this morning, I woke up compartmentalizing my tasks. A morning meeting, errands to run, emails to send. Yet in the blink of an eye, circumstances can shift, turning our meticulously planned paths into winding detours. It's a thought that often keeps me awake at night, but it's one that also motivates me to prepare for whatever challenges lie ahead. When I was younger, I had this naive belief that life would unfold neatly, each phase seamlessly leading into the next. But life is more like a chess game than a straight road. Sometimes you're left scrambling to strategize with only moments to spare. I remember the day I lost my job unexpectedly. The weight of uncertainty hung in the air like heavy fog. It was then I realized the importance of flexibility. Being able to pivot and adapt was more vital than having rigid plans. Those lessons shaped me into a more resilient individual, ready to face whatever the next day might toss my way. So, how do we prepare for the unknown? First, by fostering a mindset that embraces change. I often jot down my fears and anxieties in a journal, confronting them thoughtfully rather than shying away. By acknowledging what troubles me, I can prepare for it, not just in my mind, but in practical ways. For example, if I fear losing financial security, I might explore alternative income streams or enhance my professional skills. Action steps like these lend a sense of control in inevitable uncertainties. And that's when I can feel the tension building, as though something is just around the corner, waiting to leap into my carefully laid plans, ready to scramble my best intentions. Furthermore, I've learned that equipping myself with knowledge is one of my strongest assets. In this digital age, information is abundant, yet it requires discernment to choose what's valuable. I often dive deep into books, podcasts, and articles that challenge my understandings and push me to think outside the box. In a world that is consistently evolving, the more we educate ourselves, the more we add tools to our toolkit. It's about the long haul. Every piece of wisdom acquires its value over time, especially when a challenge strikes unexpectedly. But perhaps the most impactful preparation comes from nurturing relationships. The support of friends, family, and colleagues can transform a daunting challenge into a manageable one. I've learned to invest time in these connections, whether it's grabbing coffee or sending a simple text to check in. Those moments of connection have been my lifeline in tough times, allowing me to draw strength and gather perspectives that I alone could never muster. We are more resilient when we don't carry our burdens alone. Yet, in the seams of this warm fabric of relationships, there rests a tension. A lingering question lingers. How do I ensure these bonds remain strong, especially when the winds of change begin to howl? There's something unsettling about the unknown, about tomorrow's hurdles yet to be unveiled. It's easy to sit back, hoping for a smooth sail. But the truth is, while we prepare, we often underestimate the waves of what awaits. The pressure mounts, and with it lingers a sense of urgency. Will we be ready? Our lives are intertwined tapestries, the vibrant threads of preparation woven with occasional knots of unpredictable reality. And as night falls, I can't help but wonder, when the challenges arise tomorrow, will I face them with grace, or will I tiptoe backward, shaken by the shadows? Time will reveal the answer, and that's what propels me to embrace today with courage. Thank you for joining us on this journey through mastering the art of negotiation, strategies for success. We hope this audiobook has equipped you with the tools and insights needed to navigate negotiations with confidence and skill. Remember, the key to successful negotiation lies in preparation, emotional intelligence, and the ability to create win-win scenarios. Continue to practice and refine your skills, and you will see significant improvements in your personal and professional interactions. Stay tuned for more valuable content from Mindful Literary and keep striving for excellence in all your negotiations.